man. Good. How are you doing? The subcommittee hearing on reviewing the implementation of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act will come to order. Ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing without objection. So ordered. Also ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions without objection. So ordered. As a reminder, if members wish to insert a document into the record, please also email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. I now recognize myself for the purposes of an opening statement. Good morning, and thank you to our panel of witnesses for being here today. Our transportation network is essential to Americans' mobility, supports our quality of life, and it's vital to our economic competitiveness. Nearly 1.5 years ago, Congress passed and President signed into law the $1.2 trillion Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IJA. While I did not vote for the bill, our role today is to ensure effective and efficient execution of the current law. IJA provided historic funding increases to address America's infrastructure, including over $500 billion for programs under the subcommittee's jurisdiction. IJA significantly increased funding for existing programs, created new programs with new eligibilities, and increased by nearly 500% the amount of competitive grant funding the Secretary will award. Given the significant funding and discretion provided to the Secretary, it's essential that Congress performs its oversight role to ensure efficient and effective use of taxpayer dollars and to ensure that the administration is implementing IJA consistent with the letter of the law. The Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration have distributed approximately $157 billion in formula funding to the states and local entities. In addition, FHWA, FTA, and the Office of Secretary of Transportation have announced discretionary grants totaling about $9.6 billion. While the department has made progress distributing formula funding and awarding discretionary grants, there are very important areas where progress has stalled. In some cases, the administration is creating confusion among states and stakeholders, which could result in needless project delays. For example, the administration has not finalized its guidance on IJA's Buy America provisions that pertain to federally funded infrastructure projects. OMB released initial guidance and later proposed guidance, and agencies issued waivers and questions and answers, Q&As. Each new release of information has exacerbated the confusion and uncertainty among stakeholders, which is concerning, especially since most of the country is entering its construction season. We've also seen the department push its own agenda in direct contradiction of the law through memorandum and executive action. Last July, the administration announced a notice of proposed rulemaking to require states and MPOs to create a new performance measure to cut greenhouse gas emissions stemming from transportation. However, requiring a rule related to greenhouse gas emissions was a policy considered during IJA negotiations. In fact, it was debated at length, but expressly excluded from the final bill. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a press release from Senator Kevin Cramer, who serves as ranking member of the Subcommittee on Transportation and Infrastructure on the Senate EPW Committee from July 7th, 2022, with his statement on FHWA's greenhouse gas emissions performance measures proposed rule without objection, so ordered. In another effort to exert its progressive policy preferences, FHWA released a December 16, 2021 memorandum that directed states to deprioritize projects that increased road capacity. This policy represented a complete departure from the successful and longstanding federal-state partnership, was inconsistent with the law, and was met with confusion from the states and concerns from industry stakeholders. I was glad FHWA recently issued an updated memorandum superseding and effectively reversing the December 16, 2021 memorandum. In addition, the administration has been using its notice as a funding opportunity for discretionary grant programs to layer on requirements that do not exist in statute. Each of the issues I outlined have caused confusion and have the very real risk of delaying critical projects. And as everyone here knows, any project delay results in increased costs, something we can't afford in this environment of non-transitory high inflation, which is already eroding IJA's funding increases. Oversight is not a Republican or Democrat issue. Congress must fulfill its duty to ensure IJA is being implemented as written and that resources are addressing our most pressing transportation infrastructure and supply chain needs. I look forward to hearing from the panel about successes and where improvements can be made as the department continues implementation of IJA. I'd also like to recognize and offer my condolences to the families of the 6 workers killed last week in a highway construction zone near Baltimore. This tragic situation underscores the need to ensure the safety of all roadway users, including construction workers who are simply trying to do their jobs and help improve America's infrastructure. I now recognize Ranking Member Holmes Norton for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank Subcommittee Chair Rick Crawford for holding this hearing on the implementation of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was one of the most important bills enacted last Congress. Within our subcommittee's jurisdiction, it provided $365 billion for highways, $108 billion for transit, $43 billion for multimodal grants, and $13 billion for highway and motor carrier safety. The work of the Subcommittee on Highways and Transit helped set the bar high. Many of the funding levels in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act are similar to what we proposed in the INVEST Act. And those Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act dollars are already being put to work. In my district, the Biden-Harris administration has announced the award of nearly $10 million for the District of Columbia Department of Transportation to buy zero-emission buses for the DC circulator fleet. The DC Department of Transportation has also committed $15 billion of federal aid highway funds to expand the Metropolitan Branch Trail, and another $18.7 million to preserve and repair the city's tunnels. That data is courtesy of the Highway Dashboard created by the American Road and Transportation Builders Association, and I look forward to hearing testimony from their witness today, Paula Hammond. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act isn't a DC-specific success story, as the Highway Dashboard shows. Projects are on the ground all across the country right now. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act will benefit communities large and small, urban and rural. It will support private sector businesses like the ones many of our witnesses today represent, and public sector transportation departments and transit agencies. It makes meaningful investments in our workers, creating new allowances for states to invest in apprenticeships, on job training, and partnerships with community colleges and vocational schools. The law also requires 5% of all zero-emission bus grants be put toward training our workers to operate and maintain the transit fleets of the future. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act also includes a new focus on supporting disadvantaged communities and using the transportation infrastructure to renew our neighborhoods rather than tear them apart. The law can help us start addressing some of the greatest challenges: the threat of climate change, the needs to strengthen our economy and supply chain, and the responsibility that we have to build a transportation system that works for all. I know many members on the other side of the aisle did not support the bill, but as we will hear today, the benefits of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act are going to all communities, no matter their political leanings. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today and working together to oversee this important law. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I now recognize the Ranking Member of the full committee for an opening statement.
Thanks, Chair Crawford and Ranking Member Norton, for holding this hearing today. It is a welcome opportunity to highlight how federal dollars are benefiting our communities, spurring transportation and infrastructure projects in every single congressional district that are creating jobs and driving economic growth. My message is simple today. There are great benefits to infrastructure funding, there are early results to the bipartisan infrastructure law, and there is more to come. You cannot have a big league economy with little league infrastructure. In last Congress, this committee answered the call of the states, of local and tribal governments, of industry and other stakeholders, several of whom are on the panel today, that an aging, congested, and overburdened transportation network was badly in need of overhaul. And thanks to the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or BIL, communities across the country are building better roads, bridges, transit stations, freight facilities, truck parking, bike lanes, and sidewalks. Transportation means jobs, good family wage jobs that cannot be outsourced. These are private sector construction and engineering jobs on projects scoped and selected by state and local governments with required local public input. Thanks to the BIL, we have updated decades-old federal transportation policies to reflect economic, societal, and workforce needs. And thanks to the BIL, communities are building a cleaner, greener, safer, and more accessible transportation network. Congress didn't make this up. We followed the lead of states, cities, counties, and tribes across the country who have been hard at work to modernize and to transform the way people and goods move. Now, this committee's job is to oversee implementation of the $660 billion under the U.S. Department of Transportation. This dollar amount and the number of competitive grant opportunities is significantly larger than previous transportation bills the DOT has administered. It represents the largest increase in federal highway investment since the late 1950s. The pace at which these dollars are reaching communities is impressive. A total of $200 billion has been made available from all the initiatives funded in the BIL, even those outside the scope of this committee, and DOT has issued the lion's share. DOT has already made available nearly $125 billion in formula funds to states for highways and bridges, including funding 21% of my own state's transportation budget that passed the legislature last year. To date, more than 3,700 bridge projects have launched. States supported 36,400 new projects with federal highway formula funding through January 2023, according to the analysis by ARTBA today is another one of those accomplishments. There's at least one new project underway in every congressional district in this country. ARTBA as well provided a summary to every member of the subcommittee on what's happening in your district. You know your district's best, but this information will help you know it even better. I encourage my colleagues to review that information. Thanks to the BIL, in my own district, WashDOT is investing nearly $12 million in federal aid highway funds to rehabilitate the SR 529 Snohomish River Bridge in Everett. You don't need to know where it is, you just need to know the money's getting spent. Thanks to the BIL, US DOT has awarded $25 million raised grants to Whatcom County to replace a 60-year-old Lummi Island ferry and to the city of Linwood to construct a new 6-lane multimodal bridge over I-5, which will reduce congestion and build a more accessible transportation system for all. The BIL has also invested in more than 3,000 workforce projects across the country to train workers for in-demand jobs. There's more to come. The BIL will boost the U.S. economy, increase our domestic manufacturing base, and make our supply chains more resilient. And we still have more work to do. And I will continue to maintain regular communication with the administration. I'll continue to work with Chair Graves, Chair Crawford, Ranking Member Norton, and all of you to ensure a robust and fair oversight of these implementation efforts. It's critical that we get implementation of the BIL right. A successful rollout of BIL funding will truly demonstrate the value of infrastructure investment to everyone. And the BIL is not a set-it-and-forget-it law. We now need to follow through by Congress, state DOTs, US DOTs, cities, counties, transit agencies, tribal governments, private industry, all of us working together to deliver these projects so communities get the maximum bang for the buck. Without investments made by the BIL, the economy would be in far worse shape. To critics who want to brush off benefits of the BIL, I point you to testimony today from Paula Hammond. As it correctly notes, even with inflation taken into account, and inflation is a problem, there still has been market growth over the last year in the construction sector, whereas without the BIL, we'd likely have seen market contraction. So I'm glad to say it, thanks to the BIL, the economy is on the move, but that's why we need to continue to see the implementation of the BIL happens, and I look forward to working with all of you to make sure that happens, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Before we go to our witness statements, I'd like to explain our lighting system. As you can probably figure out, green means go. Yellow does not mean slow down and proceed with caution, as you might expect. It actually means go like heck because it's fixing to turn red. So when it turns red, you'll probably hear a little tap, tap, tap to remind you that your time has expired. So I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that. And with that, I want to introduce our first witness, Mr. Mark Williams. Mr. Mark Williams is a member of the Board of Directors, American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, the Executive Director of the Texas Department of Transportation. Mr. Dwayne Boyd is with us as well. He is on behalf of the National Stone, Sand, and Gravel Association. Thank you for being here. He's the president of Mid-South Region at CRH Americas Materials. Mr. Eric Dreer, Assistant General Manager of Sanbro in Baltimore. We appreciate you being here as well. And then finally, Paula Hammond, Senior Vice President and National Market Leader, WSP USA 2023 Chair, American Road and Transportation Builders Association. Ask unanimous consent that the witness's full statement be included in the record without objection, so ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. With that, Mr. Williams, you'll be the first to go. Recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Crawford, Ranking Member Norton, and members of the subcommittee. We appreciate the opportunity to appear today to discuss the implementation of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. As I was introduced, my name again is Mark Williams, and I serve as Executive Director of the Texas Department of Transportation and on the Board of Directors of AASHTO, and it's an honor to testify on behalf of AASHTO's members, the State Departments of Transportation of all 50 states, D.C., and Puerto Rico. AASHTO thanks the subcommittee for your dedicated and tireless leadership on transportation issues. And my remarks today will focus on how states are working to implement the IIJA and key opportunities and challenges ahead. AASHTO members understand the importance of partnerships and have been working with USDOT to ensure implementation of this important legislation that reflects the statutory provisions and the negotiated balance of policy priorities approved by Congress through the IIJA. Our state DOTs are committed to doing our part to achieve successful delivery of the IIJA by improving transportation safety, mobility, and resiliency. In Texas, federal funding represents 1/3 of our overall transportation program, so the IIJA's 5-year duration, its record increase in formula funds to states, and increased program flexibility enable Texas and our state DOT peers the ability to address our own unique transportation needs. Indisputably, the biggest challenge facing state DOTs is the dramatic increase in roadway fatalities over the past 3 years. Every day we are faced with the tragic loss of life across the country. I join Chairman Crawford in recognizing the 6 members of the Maryland DOT road crew who were tragically killed in a work zone crash last week, and we extend our condolences to their families and to the families of the over 40,000 individuals we now lose every year on our nation's roadways. In Texas, it has been over 22 years since we last experienced a single day without a traffic death. The IIJA's increased funding and flexibility for the Highway Safety Improvement Program allows states to expand our efforts to identify and implement important countermeasures to reduce fatalities and serious injuries. A particular concern that state DOTs are facing is the inflation and the supply chain challenges that have significantly driven up project costs. In Texas, our highway cost index growth exceeds 30%, effectively eroding the gain in federal buying power offered through the IIJA. The recently reported $3.5 billion contract authority discrepancy between the FHWA and USDOT accounting systems is another major concern to state DOTs, as this could negatively impact highway formula dollars, which are the most effective means of delivering federal investment nationwide. States ask Congress and USDOT to work to ensure that any accounting reconciliation will not impact state contract authority. While the large number of discretionary grants included in the IIJA presents added funding opportunities, they also create challenges for states, local partners, and even USDOT. The cost of developing one grant application can reach up to $200,000 for some AASHTO members. The vast majority of proposals are unsuccessful, and those few that are successful can take up to 18 months for the grant to be finalized and funds obligated. AASHTO members strongly support the expansion of America's manufacturing capacity and workforce, and that are sought through the policy objectives of Build America, Buy America. However, uncertainty and complexities related to implementation of program requirements contribute to project delays and increased cost, with contractors and utility companies struggling to meet the new and evolving sourcing requirements. AASHTO will continue working with OMB to ensure that sufficient, specific, and permanent Buy America guidance is offered so that critical infrastructure projects are not disrupted while good faith efforts are made to integrate new requirements. On the new National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program, AASHTO and state DOTs are working to deliver the goals and outcomes established by Congress. To effectively utilize this funding, flexibility, and adaptability in how and where to install EV chargers and in the contracting methods will help states meet their unique needs. Workforce development remains a critical issue for AASHTO members as it has contributed to the significant rise in some of the project delivery costs and presented challenges to state DOTs in managing their programs. Like other states, TxDOT is experiencing the highest workforce attrition rate we have seen in decades. In response, states are implementing measures to enrich workforce development, build initiatives to retain our workforce, and enhance and expand our DBE programs. To close, AASHTO members take seriously the responsibility to implement the IIJA to deliver critical transportation infrastructure. We are ready to work with Congress and USDOT to continue to address implementation challenges contributing to cost increases and funding uncertainty while improving program efficiencies. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Boyd, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Larson, Chairman Crawford, and Ranking Member Holmes Norton, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify on the implementation of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. My name is Dwayne Boyd, and I am the president of the Mid-South region at CRH, America's Materials. I lead our business operations in Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, and have spent the past 38 years in the construction materials industry. CRH is a leading provider of building material solutions that build and connect our world. CRH employs over 75,000 people in 29 countries. In North America, our footprint spans 48 states and 6 Canadian provinces. I'm here representing the National Stone, Sand, and Gravel Association. Our industry operates over 9,000 locations in the U.S. and employs over 100,000 people in high-paying jobs to source 2.5 billion tons of material. I want to thank the members of this committee for passing IIJA. Your efforts to strengthen America's infrastructure means high-paying, skilled jobs and widespread improvements where we live and work. These investments are helping improve our nation's infrastructure. The IIJA reauthorization of the Federal Highway Funding Program for 5 years and the significant increase in funding provides much-needed stability for our state's DOTs and our industry. I want to mention a few areas in the implementation of IIJA for your consideration. First of all, IIJA included a new federal Build America, Buy America sourcing requirements for federal infrastructure programs. CRH and the material industry support Buy America, as we primarily source our aggregates and manufacture our products in the local communities where we live and work. However, due to a limited supply, we as an industry are unable to produce or source enough goods like cement, aggregates, and liquid asphalt domestically. NSSGA and other trade associations, along with a diverse group from my industry, educated members of Congress on this fact and were successful in getting aggregates-based materials excluded from Buy America. We encourage Congress to implement the exclusion for our materials as intended in IIJA. Next, we need permitting reform to streamline the delivery of infrastructure projects. It takes years, if not decades, to plan and approve new projects. We strongly support the bipartisan provisions in IIJA that encourage federal agency cooperation to reduce permitting decision to 2 years. As you know, the vast majority of IIJA funding is given to states based on standard formulas. However, there are many funding opportunities through a wide range of grant programs. I have heard from state DOT concerns about the complexity and criteria required to apply for these grants. I urge you to find ways to make it easier for applicants to apply and compete for these opportunities. One of the biggest challenges in my business is access to a skilled workforce. Today, CRH has more than 3,000 current open jobs. Over 40% of these jobs are for drivers and operators. Our industry supports legislation that would expand driver and operator recruitment and training, mine engineering education, developing vocational programs supporting the industry, veteran employment opportunities, and increasing the legal workforce of immigrants in the U.S. Sustainability is important to us. At CRH and across the industry, we are embracing our responsibility and evolving as a business to help better serve our customers and local communities with integrated, sustainable construction solutions. The products we make and the services we provide are essential, contributing to safer, cleaner, and more sustainable homes, cities, and critical infrastructure. In my career, we have led in using reclaimed asphalt pavement in our pavement mix designs. We support increasing the allowable route percentage in construction projects. We have embraced the use of technologies like warm mix asphalt, the use of alternative and renewable fuels, and are helping to develop more efficient asphalt plants. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify before you today. CRH and the entire aggregate industry are proud to deliver the resources needed to build our communities and modernize our infrastructure, which is essential to the growth of our nation.
Thank you, Mr. Boyd. Mr. Dreer, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Chairman Crawford, Ranking Member Norton,
Check
and
your mic
members
there.
of the Subcommittee on Highways and Transit. Thank you for the invitation to testify this morning and for the opportunity to discuss the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and efforts to modernize our nation's most critical infrastructure. My name is Eric Dreer, and I'm an Assistant General Manager for Chimbro, a full-service contractor that delivers world-class construction services for complex civil infrastructure projects throughout the country. Founded in 1949, Chimbro is one of America's largest 100% employee-owned, open-shop construction and construction services company, operating in more than 40 states and employing more than 4,000 team members. Today, I am testifying on behalf of the Associated Builders and Contractors, a national construction trade association with 68 chapters representing more than 22,000 members. In my role, I oversee all operations in Chimbro's infrastructure market. My teams have taken on some of the company's most innovative and challenging infrastructure projects, including the phased development of the District Wharf here in Washington, D.C., construction of the 175-foot Capitol Wheel overlooking the Potomac River at National Harbor, the U.S. Naval Academy's McNair Road Bridge replacement, and the replacement of the I-295 bridge over Veranda Street in Portland, Maine in 60 hours using accelerated bridge construction methods. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act has been hailed as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to build and repair some of our nation's most critical infrastructure, including the highways and bridges that have been in need of investment for decades. To accomplish this goal, however, critical issues must be addressed. Since the bill was signed into law in 2021, the administration has taken action, departing from the congressional intent of the bill, showing clear and unnecessary favoritism towards unionized contractors and unionized labor on taxpayer-funded infrastructure projects receiving federal funds. We have seen significant changes in our economy that I believe will affect the overall success of this bipartisan effort, including record inflation, supply chain delays, and workforce shortages. Since November 2021, when President Biden signed into law the IIJA, input prices for construction projects have increased over 11.1%. The construction industry is facing significant supply chain challenges, with many in the industry finding it difficult to find consistently available building materials, such as lumber, steel, concrete, along with specialized construction equipment. This is driven in part by the new federal investment in infrastructure and other critical construction, which has led to further delays and put pressure on suppliers to increase production. ABC also anticipates the construction industry will need to attract an estimated 500,000 additional workers on top of the normal hiring pace in 2023 to meet the demand for labor. Chimbro is doing our part to meet this demand, offering apprenticeship opportunities in several trades, including electrical, millwright, pipe fitter, iron worker, carpenter, substation technician, and power line worker. The IIJA Buy America provisions and the cumbersome waiver process that has been implemented will exacerbate these delays and added costs. These requirements must also be balanced with safeguards against drastic cost increases and excessive delays to infrastructure projects, without which could have a severe impact on the ability of contractors to complete jobs on time and on budget. Finally, The after-the-fact regulations and strings attached to federal infrastructure grant programs will severely impact the allocation of IIJA funds. President Biden's Executive Order 14063 directs all federal agencies to require PLAs on federal construction projects exceeding $35 million. PLA mandates and preferences will increase costs and reduce competition on federally assisted construction projects. Americans deserve more efficient and effective policies that will encourage all qualified contractors and their skilled workforces to compete to build long-lasting projects at the best price. I've included additional details in my written testimony on these important points, and I look forward to answering your questions today.
Thank you, Mr. Dreer. Ms. Hammond, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for inviting me here in my role as the chair of American Road and Transportation Builders Association. The association's public and private sector members design, build, and maintain all aspects of the transportation network in the United States. I also serve as the Senior Vice President for WSP USA, and we are the nation's oldest engineering, design, and consulting organization. Before I offer our perspectives on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, I, as others have, would like to address briefly the tragedy in Baltimore where 6 roadway workers were killed last week. Our heartfelt condolences to their families and loved ones. Our members never accept that such work zone intrusions are inevitable. Safety for workers and motorists will always be our top priority. Now, shifting to the IIJA, I begin with early morning on Friday, January 28, 2022, when the Fern Hollow Bridge in Pittsburgh collapsed without warning, tragically falling 100 feet into the park below. 9 were injured, but miraculously, no one was killed. The bridge failure received national media attention, heightened by a visit from President Biden that same day. What unfortunately does not get mentioned in the media is what happened after the collapse. In this instance, with the help of $25 million in federal funding, including with the IIJA dollars, a new 460-foot 4-lane bridge opened to traffic in less than 1 year. This new bridge is a tangible illustration of how federal transportation investments can work quickly to benefit communities. In Idaho, the IIJA is also helping improve a 6.5-mile challenging stretch of Highway 95 by building a safer route with added lanes, wider shoulders, and less steep grades. As one Idaho transportation official observed, quote, "I'm glad we're moving forward. The bottom line is we want to save lives," end quote. These 2 projects are among the more than 29,000 improvements moving forward last year in every congressional district with IIJA funds. This represents 2,500 more projects than in 2021. In the first 4 months of fiscal year 2023, the momentum continues. States have committed highway formula funds for 7,400 projects, 3,000 more than the same period last year. We have provided each of you with a fact sheet, as was referenced, to demonstrate the ways your constituents are benefiting from the law. Mr. Chairman, it's hard to ignore the initial positive ways your constituents and the benefits of the IIJA, but it's also hard to overlook the impacts of inflation. Increased material costs and supply chain challenges undoubtedly have had a dilutive effect on the law's investments. That said, it's also clear this situation would have been dramatically worse if Congress opted for another flat-funded extension of the surface transportation programs. Instead, our analysis at ARTBA points to real market growth over the last year. Another aspect of the IIJA story relates to new regulatory requirements that may influence cost and delivery of projects. We encourage this subcommittee to continue its oversight role, ensuring common sense environmental review and approval process reforms, namely the one federal decision, are fully realized. The saying "time is money" is is apt here, as these reforms have the potential to reduce overall costs and move projects to construction more quickly. Conversely, well-meaning new requirements such as the expansion of Buy America, if not pursued with stakeholder input and articulated clearly, could have the opposite outcome and results in unnecessary project delays. Mr. Chairman, we are just 16 months into the 5-year infrastructure law. The highway, bridge, and public transportation investments are working as intended. Many more benefits to the American people are yet to come. Thanks again for allowing me to participate in today's hearing, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Hammond. Appreciate all the testimony that our panelists have given this morning. We'll start with questions from members. I'll recognize myself to begin with. I'm going to pose this question to each of you. I'll start with Mr. Williams. And IJA contained provisions to streamline the permitting processes to help speed up project delivery, including codification of the one federal decision policy, especially as states and industry are continuing to face persistently high inflation, as has been indicated in our testimony today. It's important that we address needless delays in permitting to ensure projects can move forward expeditiously. So my question is this: the department has told the committee that it has fully implemented one federal decision and other streamlining provisions contained in IJA. Mr. Williams, has DOT communicated that to you, or are you otherwise aware that these provisions have been implemented?
Thank you, Chair Crawford. We are aware of the U.S. DOT's provisions with one federal decision. We've not yet had a chance to see that in action on any of our major projects yet. There's a variety of things that have factored into that, but we look forward to hopefully achieving that and seeing some benefits. Ultimately, in our view, realizing the benefits of one federal decision is going to be up to the willingness of each of the individual agencies that are involved to work with DOTs and other infrastructure operators to expedite their own processes internal to their programs so that we can ultimately see a reduction in the federal permitting time that goes to environmental decision-making in our country.
Thank you, Mr. Boyd. Any comments?
Obviously, Mark would have more insight into the permitting issues, but just from a contractor's perspective, obviously, we'd love to see it streamlined. The faster, the better, and as a contractor, we're sitting on go, and any delays is obviously we're not in favor of. So just from a contractor's perspective, we'd love to see it streamlined and sped up.
Okay. Mr. Dreher?
I share the same sentiment as Mr. Boyd. You know, a lot of times the permit process, when we bid a project, sometimes the permits are not obtained. So, you know, we're selected to start the project and, right, we don't have the permits. So sometimes that just leads to further delays. And on the front end of the job, right, getting all the permits before we start work and, you know, the clients put the job out to bid, just increasing that overall duration, right, is definitely poses challenges to the overall schedule.
Ms. Hammond, your comments?
Mr. Chairman, I think you're hearing a theme here. The one thing that keeps project transportation investments moving is certainty of the funding, which you have applied in the IIJA bill, but also an understanding and quick processing of decisions at the federal level and permitting agencies. We know that any efforts towards moving the one federal decision forward to streamlining the processing time while protecting the environmental provisions of NEPA are important and will certainly save us funds.
On that note, how committed do you think the administration is to improving permitting processes, especially given the fact that President Biden has moved to reverse NEPA reforms made during the previous administration? I will go ahead and start with you, Mr. Williams.
Thank you again, Chairman. Well, we have seen statements that have come through the administration, through US DOT, that causes concerns about potentially overlaying additional regulations on top of what we see as statutory provisions in law. That raises concerns and questions for us going forward in terms of our ability to expedite the permitting, especially on the environmental side. One of the things that's very important for us in terms of streamlining that process, Texas and several states enjoy a delegation of NEPA authority to us, where we're responsible for administering the NEPA programs within the federal laws that exist. That has proven to be successful. We hope and expect that that will continue to exist. But that's an area that we have concerns that the administration is showing signs that they're pushing back on some of the flexibilities that are provided to states to take advantage of delegated NEPA authority.
Excellent. Anybody else have any comments on that? No? Let me ask you this, and in the last almost 40 seconds that I have left. On greenhouse gas performance measures, the Texas DOT filed docket comments in opposition to the administration's proposed greenhouse gas performance measurement, our management rule rather. In that proposal, FHWA sets very aggressive targets for carbon emission reduction and effectively takes away from states the ability to set their own targets. However, there's no legal authority for this proposed rule. Such a mandate was actually specifically excluded from IJA during negotiations. So putting aside the lack of legal authority, the proposed rule also does not distinguish between urban and rural areas. In rural states where largest cities are still relatively small, can't meaningfully reduce carbon by building a subway or a bus rapid transit system in an effort to reduce commuter automobile traffic, even if it was affordable. So is the administration's greenhouse gas performance measure a one-size-fits-all mandate? And how can states reduce carbon emissions from transportation in rural areas?
Thank you, Chair Crawford. We agree that it's our position in Texas that the administration's proposed greenhouse gas rules goes far beyond what is available in statute. We support continuing the reduction that we've seen in greenhouse gases, but the proposed rules, along with the targets that they've established, are completely unrealistic in terms of the ability of state DOTs through the transportation process to see those achieved.
Thank you. I will now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hammond, one of the goals of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is to help America tackle its biggest transportation projects by providing increased funding and long-term certainty. Your testimony notes that the number of large projects receiving federal support increased by over 50% last fiscal year. Can you speak to the economic and job creation benefits we see when we invest in critical large investment projects?
Thank you. What we have seen and know about transportation investments is that there are early wins and long-term wins in transportation investment. First, early wins, the benefit of added jobs in the community and in construction jobs that are well-paying jobs and create a livable wage for folks. Long-term, these kinds of transportation infrastructure projects not only keep our travelers safe, but also enable them to live and travel in a way that economic growth and quality of life are enhanced within their communities. So it's a win-win, both early and throughout the continuation of investments and the benefits.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, in 2020, the American Association of State Highways and Transportation Officials adopted a resolution titled Addressing Race, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. The resolution aims to promote, and here I'm quoting, equity, diversity, and inclusion to address racism and inequality. In a similar vein, the Texas DOT says the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion must be integrated throughout all levels of Texas DOT to continually innovate and advance. Can you speak, Mr. Williams, to how Texas DOT is working to address racism and inequality and promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in line with the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials' recreation and goals outlined on your website?
Thank you, Ranking Member Norton. We are proud of the progress that we have made, both at the national level through AASHTO and within Texas, in growing the diversity of our programs, reflecting Texas and our nation and who we are and what we do. And we've seen results. We've had a number of programs that have been designed to provide opportunity to a broad cross-section of individuals. Our recent Recently, our Connect You to Jobs program that we have through the Texas DOT was recognized nationally in providing opportunities to previously justice-involved young adults and introducing them and bringing them into the transportation industry, helping to expand the workforce that we have, that I emphasized in my earlier remarks, have been challenging for the industry. I can also say that we are seeing results within the Texas DOT, and those results are aligning with federal and state law that focus on merit and equality in how we go about hiring and promotion. Looking at senior leadership appointments within my DOT over the past year, 2/3 of the hiring and promotion within senior leadership areas within the Texas DOT last year involved individuals with diverse backgrounds. So we're proud of the progress that we're making, and we look forward to continuing that going forward.
Well, Mr. Williams, in your testimony, you discussed the importance of improving safety for all road users and applying the principles of a safe system approach. Sadly, traffic fatalities continue to rise across the country. I'm particularly concerned with the safety of our most vulnerable road users, including pedestrians. According to the Governor's Highway Safety Association, pedestrian deaths are increasing faster than all other traffic fatalities in Texas. Pedestrian fatalities accounted for 1 in 5 of all traffic fatalities in 2021. What steps is Texas taking to translate the principles of the safe system approach to real-world project design and selection?
Thank you again for that question, Ranking Member. You're correct. Focusing on vulnerable road users has been a top priority for the state of Texas as we have sought to reduce the rising level of fatalities that we're having in the state of Texas. And Texas is not alone. We've seen similar increases in state DOTs around the nation, and focusing on all of the different contributing factors is very important. One of the things that we've been doing in Texas, and you mentioned the Safer by Design approach, that applies to both rural and urban areas. We have been integrating that into updating our design standards that we utilize on both our rural and rural and urban highways to better integrate designs for vulnerable road users. In addition, we have developed a toolkit with the Texas A&M Transportation Institute to help look at trade-offs on different types of safety measures that we can make when we're designing our roads to ensure safety in those programs.
Thank you. Notice the aggressive nature that I take with that mallet. Effective leadership has now taken over this committee. I just want y'all to know that. No, just kidding. Who's next? Oh, Mr. Webster, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, witnesses, for showing up. It's really good. Enjoyed your testimony. Mr. Boyd, yeah, you probably know that we've sent from the U.S. Treasury, we've sent probably $300 billion of monies to pump up the Highway Trust Fund. And that's since maybe last 15 years or so, which means we're really broke. We just aren't saying it. And so we pump it up with money that we really don't have from sources that don't apply to transportation, but we do. Are you in any way concerned about the certainty of future years of coming up with money and the solvency of the Highway Trust Fund?
Absolutely, sir. I guess the greatest benefit from a contractor perspective from the IIJA was the 5-year guaranteed funding. And so we've lived in so many years, so it's just continuing resolution, continuing, and it made it really difficult on the DOTs to plan. It made it difficult on a business such as CRH to plan, to invest in people, to invest in assets. And so, yes, there is a concern. You know, where are we in 5 years? How do we fund it in 5 years? And that's why we're going to look to great congressmen like yourself to help figure this out.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Do you have any
I don't have that answer. I mean, I have no idea how we fund it in the future, but, you know, obviously, we're gonna need new revenue streams, and I'm sure each of you have ideas on how that'll be funded. But I do know as far as a contractor in this industry, we would like, at the minimum, of 5-year plans, so we can plan.
So you think we need something to plan on, I guess, in the future?
Yes, yes.
I've got a bill, I might ask you to, I didn't think about this, but I do, and it's a bill that doesn't require any federal, state, or local monies. It's a infrastructure bill, but it's based on private money, not public money. And so I'd love your support for that. We just filed it here the first week of session, and we believe that there is money out there, billions of dollars out there, that people are willing to invest in it from private sector. And even if the road, which I don't figure this is going to happen, it goes belly up, there would be no dollars, federal dollars, state dollars, local dollars spent on sort of fixing that up. It would be all public, and they'd have to bear the burden if the project failed. But anyway, I would give that to you as one example of something. And it's not, the good thing is, it would not distinguish between fossil fuel taxes and other opportunities for vehicles, electric powered or otherwise, to skip some of those. And so, anyway, that's one thing I would like to tell you about. But anyone else have anything to say about the continuation of the Highway Trust Fund as far as the solvency of it? Yes.
ARTBA has long supported the notion that transportation revenue should be collected from the users. So user fees certainly are what we support and have supported many opportunities for looking at vehicle mile traveled or road usage charge kinds of collection systems to truly charge the users as they are using the transportation system. That said, we know that in this transition between now and when we have a national pilot, we think that there is opportunities to make sure that even electric vehicles are paying their share and their fair use of the system. 32 states, I believe, have enacted registration fees for electric vehicles, and we're encouraging the federal Congress to consider a fee for electric vehicle usage so that they're also contributing to the investments in the transportation system.
All right, thank you. Time's out. Yield back.
Thanks, sir. My friend Congressman Larson is recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I couldn't help but note that in one of the testimonies, the passage of the law was called a once-in-a-generation opportunity, and I really want to break us of that, because when you look around the paintings of this room, you're reminded that passing a transportation bill was like a once in every 5 to 6 year opportunity. It used to be the regular, boring work of Congress to fund the infrastructure on a consistent basis. And I think we need to get back to that rather than wait another generation to do something like we just did. And so I hope that we can start putting pieces in place over the next several years. So in 4 years or so, we can return to looking at this again and pass another round of policy change and funding to continue the great work that this current bill is doing. But this bill we do have challenges as well with this bill, and I want to first go to Paula Hammond, because your testimony, as well as others, talks about the rising costs of inflation. I think we need to recognize that as an implementation challenge. I don't think we should shy away from that. But Mr. Williams said that, we want to work with the DOT to address that. So I'm going to ask you first, what can we do to address that from a construction perspective?
Well, one of the things that we know as we recover from the pandemic and the supply chain issues and the rising cost of inflation is that without this money, we would all be in trouble. The transportation industry would be in a contraction area. The benefits the transportation projects are creating for the users, let's not forget the people that we're serving, is going to help, I think, with the economic recovery of our country and in communities and states. I think certainty is the most important thing that Congress and USDOT can give us on how we take care of bringing back manufacturing to the United States, how we do it reasonably and practically, and not hold up the delivery of projects with the uncertain Buy America provisions. We need those to be settled because we support this happening. We just need to know some certainty. And I think that's one of the most important things that we can move forward with.
Yeah, Mr. Williams, do you have another, anything to add on maybe how to address this challenge, particular challenge? Again, it's a real challenge and we shouldn't shy away from it.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I would echo the comments of the witness. Certainty in regulatory and permitting issues, but also flexibility. Flexibility in our ability to utilize the different formula portion programs within the IIJA to meet the unique needs that each state has so that we can direct those funds to the projects that can move forward most efficiently and effectively and put those dollars to work.
Mr. Boyd, one of the challenges you outlined was workforce availability, workforce development. How are you both dealing with availability as well as workforce availability as well as workforce development? What are you doing? Maybe what you're telling your members and members as well.
We are getting very, very involved in vocational schools from the front end. We're encouraging high school students to look vocational schools. We got a very robust intern program ongoing, and the thousands and thousands and thousands of job fairs we're trying to participate in, and the workforce is a challenge. And like I said in my opening statements, drivers and operators seem to be our biggest hope. But we would gladly support any federal help we can get with whether it be through vocational schools or any kind of driver operator training that we can get done. But the workforce is an issue.
Great. Mr. Dreyer, I don't recall of your testimony exactly if you just, maybe you did, just Build America, Buy America. I think I would argue it's something we here on the committee are as well going to walk through a little bit to get it to happen. Do you have some thoughts about how we can do that?
Yep. So just the Buy America provisions, we're pretty familiar with it. You know, a lot of the jobs that we bid, we understand the provisions, and when we run into challenges as we're on the project and there's only certain components of that project that actually come from non-domestic sources, and we have to apply for the waiver, and sometimes that waiver process takes well over 12 months, right? And, you know, it just ends up adding costs, it delays the job, and, you know, if you can't get these components, that ends up pushing the overall schedule.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. There are benefits to infrastructure funding. We've seen early results. There's more to come, and I appreciate the chance, and I will yield back my negative 28 seconds.
Thank you. I will covet that for never. This comes to the weird part of this thing where you recognize yourself. So I'm recognizing myself, which I always thought is kind of odd. But anyway, thank y'all for being here. Mr. Boyd, I'm curious about the excessive water of the United States regulations that have affected your industry. How have they, and is it negatively or in a positive manner?
First of all, Congressman, thank you for visiting the asphalt plant in Knoxville. So thank you for that.
Yes, sir. It's the most recycled product in the world, is asphalt.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I assume you're referring to WOTUS.
Yes, sir.
I think they're causing issues not only for the DOTs, whether probably new capacity, new construction type products, but they also causing issues for the contractors such as ourselves from a permitting, trying to find new sand and gravel or limestone or granite quarries. I gave an example yesterday to a group of people where her meeting was ultimately denied on a potential aggregate site just due to a farmer had just a little pond in his pasture for his cattle, like less than an acre pond. And the water we get in the pond 3 months out of the year. Sometimes it would overflow over the dam, and somehow or another that overflow got the attention that it was a navigable stream, or went to a navigable stream. So anyway, ultimately that permitting got denied because of that little issue. So we do need clarity around WOTUS. It seems the rules to be changing, and from a contractor's perspective, that's our biggest issue, is from the permitting side.
Thank you, Mr. Boyd. Another question. I wear these old Carhartt jackets, and I remember one time my friend Maxine Waters, when I was just a young freshman up here, asked me, he said, "Are you that boy that always wears that barn jacket?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, "Why do you wear that?" And I said, "Well, chair lady, because that jacket's just like me." I said, "It holds up under pressure." 3 reasons. It holds up under pressure, it's American made, and it's cheap. So, and she said, "We're going to get along just fine," and we've become best of friends since then. I know that causes both sides of the aisle much anger and fear, but I think it's kind of cool myself. And I say that, I wonder, because I'm always about buying American. I don't even buy Levi's anymore. I buy them off of eBay because they're not made in America, just like this style of Carhartt that I like. Why is it so important that construction materials be excluded from the Buy America?
And that's a region-to-region issue. There are parts of the country that I'm going to use liquid asphalt for an example. That's the binder that goes on our hot mix asphalt. There's parts of the country in the Northeast that do not have access to that material, and most of that is brought in from Canada. So obviously that would create an issue. The other issue would be from an aggregate perspective. On the Gulf Coast, we have been used to getting aggregate in from South America on boat ships. And so if that is negated, that's obviously going to cause a supply issue on the Gulf Coast part of this country. And that's 2 examples that we have in our business.
All right. Mr. Dreyer, you kind of look a little lonesome over there, so I'm going to ask you a question. How can the federal government get out of your way so your projects can get built better and at a lower cost? And I do appreciate the ABC. They've been a constant thorn in my side for about 26 years now, and I've enjoyed that relationship.
Thank you. Permitting, right? So the overall duration of the project from start to finish, funding, permitting to construction, the overall duration, just removing the red tape to improve that process. PLA mandates, right, where you've heard it a lot today. There's a significant workforce shortage in all industries, and we believe that fair and open competition, right, mandating only unionized contractors can bid projects only exacerbates the workforce shortage issue. So fair and open competition, allowing more bidders to participate in the projects, ultimately will, right, open the competition, reduce costs, and reduce schedule.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, in 5 seconds, can you tell me what the biggest challenge for states to deliver infrastructure projects is?
Inflation.
Thank you. I yield nothing back to no one, and I recognize Representative Strickland. Who we got next? Menendez, I'm sorry, brother.
Hey, you got it right the second time. That's all that matters.
Yeah, nobody gets budget right, so don't worry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Boyd, I just want to go to you real quickly. I think in your written testimony, you state that CRH has over 3,000 current open jobs. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you've testified today that our workforce is one of the biggest challenges that we have in moving these large-scale infrastructure projects?
That's correct.
And you point to developing vocational schools. Is that correct?
Yes.
I agree with you. You also point to bipartisan measures for programs for America's veterans, active and reserve service members. Is that correct?
Yes.
I agree with you, sir. Finally, you urge Congress to examine and update our immigration laws and provide new opportunities to increase the legal workforce in the United States. Is that correct?
Yes.
I agree with you, sir. And I would just urge you and all people in your industry across the country to urge your representatives to do the same. We're here and we're capable of passing those laws to get you the workers that you all need. And I would love to work with my friends across the aisle to make that happen for all of you. So thank you for including that in your testimony. Ms. Hammond, your testimony highlights that at least one new project is underway in every congressional district. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In your experience leading a state DOT, how important is it that every community receive equitable infrastructure investment?
Well, first of all, the benefits of the federal law allow for flexibility for states to make the investments that are needed in their states and regions and communities. As those dollars are spent flexibly, the formula dollars, and even in the new discretionary programs, states and local agencies can compete to invest in the kinds of projects and programs that either enhance the ability for freight to move better, for people to live in a suburb and work in the city, but also for those communities who've been harmed in the past by some of the investments our forefathers made in the transportation, interstate, and other kinds of investments. Just like environmental impacts that we've made over the years, we're correcting those. And so now our investments are able to go to the right place at the right time to enhance the quality of life and the economy of the communities that we serve.
Correct, and I appreciate that. And in a short way, saying that having a project in every congressional district basically assures the American people that no one is getting left behind for the implementation of this law. Would you agree with that statement?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. One more question for you. We want to maximize this investment, every single dollar. How can our communities leverage these federal dollars to ensure they continue to see projects delivered for their constituents?
Communities can and should be working with their state DOTs to not just when there's an opportunity for a grant, but early and often communicate on developing a transportation plan that works not just for the state, but for the communities as well. And so the more cooperation we get at the local level with our delivery partners and owners of the state's infrastructure, and the more or the less red tape that's provided on delivering those dollars, the better. Certainty in the rules as they're coming out on the delivery of IIJA and understanding what it takes to get these projects delivered is critical.
Absolutely, I appreciate that. So let's work together is what I'm hearing,
Yep.
right? Federal government, states, municipalities across the country?
Yes.
I agree with you. You also mentioned, sorry, I'm going to come back to you for one more thing. You mentioned flexibility in this comment. You also mentioned certainty, and that the best thing that Congress can do is provide certainty for municipalities, states, and their planning of these large projects. Would you agree that the certainty of fully funding and implementing the bipartisan infrastructure law would be helpful and provide the certainty that you alluded to earlier? Yes or no?
Yes.
Extremely helpful. One more quick question with my 42 seconds. Mr. Williams, Texas Department of Transportation, I believe there are 38 congressional districts in Texas, which means there's at least 38 projects going on in Texas right now. I represent New Jersey. We only have 12 congressional districts. So when we think about this as a national issue, how important is that all 38 congressional districts in Texas are participating in this program?
It's very important because we work with not only those districts, but with the MPOs and the local communities to advance those projects and to leverage the federal funds along with state funds to help address safety, resiliency, and relieve congestion around the state.
Absolutely. And I don't have any more time, but that was because the chair got my name wrong, so I yield back my negative time. Thanks so much.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Nell's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Williams, good to see you and the others on the panel. I represent Texas 22nd District, Southwest Houston. Very, very busy area, growing suburban area of Houston, and just growing leaps and bounds. And we had great conversation yesterday, Mr. Williams, talking about some of the obstacles, some of the hurdles that we're having to deal with the population growth that we're seeing in the great state of Texas. And I appreciate your time. And one of the things that is really incredibly frustrating for my constituents, and I think for Americans across the entire country, is the politics that get involved with things that could have or have a potential impact on our lives, things that could improve our lives. The example I'd like to share with you is the Federal Highway Administration sent a letter to TxDOT, sent it to you, asking you all to halt construction of Interstate 45's expansion project because of civil rights and environmental justice concerns. This pause, it lasted 2 years. 2 years. There was a letter sent to the DOT up here, and a complaint was filed. It said that this project, an $8 billion project, violated the Civil Rights Act of like 64 or 65. I don't know how this road project was considered racist. It was there to reduce congestion, and if anybody lives around that Houston area, if you ever want to try to drive to Dallas on I-45, or if you live off of 45 and you want to get into Houston, I highly recommend you don't start work at 8 o'clock in the morning and try to get home at 5 o'clock. A 4-hour trip to Dallas could take 6 because it's crazy, that road, and we need this road. I believe, Mr. Boyd, you talked about permitting, the delays of these permits. I think, Ms. Hammond, you talked about inflation. I can't imagine. This project has been in the works for 17 years. 17 years. It kept getting delayed. They were coming out there. The environmental justice lawyers are saying the project is racist, big problems. I can't imagine what the inflation has done now. Maybe it's not going to be $8 billion. Maybe it'll be $9 billion. Maybe it'll be $10 billion because of these continued delays. Mr. Williams, is that I-45 project racist?
I don't believe that highway projects in and of themselves are racist. We work hard to ensure that when we develop projects that they align with federal environmental policies, and we work with the communities that are served by those to mitigate and minimize impacts to those communities.
I agree. Did the project not consider environmental concerns?
We went through a number of years of environmental permitting, working as well with the Federal Highway Administration. When we reached our record of decision 2 years ago, it was immediately after that that the project was paused. We did not agree with the pause. We feel like that time duration that was involved was entirely too long, and the project was severely impacted by rising inflation costs. We are pleased that we have reached a voluntary resolution agreement with the Federal Highway Administration that allows the project as it was originally approved environmentally to once again proceed. But the 2-year delay certainly has had a significant impact on that.
That's great. Common sense prevails, I guess, here. U.S. DOT and state DOTs are supposed to be partners. Supposed to be partners, come together in support of the nation's transportation system. How is that working out for us?
Well, I would say that on balance, we have a good partnership with our Federal Highway Administration. Our division office in Texas is one that we work with very carefully, and we work with and we appreciate the involvement of different levels of individuals within the Federal Highway Administration. I would say that the memorandum that was drafted a couple of years ago in December of 21 that sought to redefine a century-old relationship between states and FHWA caused concern, not just for Texas, but for many of our AASHTO member states. We're pleased that that memo has been largely rescinded and replaced with a memorandum by the new administrator that reflects and reaffirms that commitment.
One of the things we discussed yesterday was the Railroad Crossing Elimination Program, and I'm very interested, obviously, in this program. It seems like something that would eliminate lengthy delays at railroad crossings. I think it's something to improve safety and something that the freight industry would support. And I ask that you work with us, work with my office on improving the program, and any other state DOT that thinks they have some good policy suggestions to either expand the program or make it more efficient. Obviously, in the news recently, rail derailments, I mean, individuals crossing these rail crossings unsafely. We can do better at that, and I want to work with you to make sure, and anybody else, any other state that's interested in improving that program, because I think it's very important. Thank you, sir, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Ms. Napolitano is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Williams, your testimony discuss the need for federal government to provide flexibility to states in deployment of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. I'm very concerned that the federal law currently prohibits states from allowing electric vehicle charging stations at highway rest stops. Do you believe highway rest stops would be an ideal location to install electrical vehicle charging stations to address range anxiety for long-distance travels and adding charging stations in rural locations? Do you believe Congress should allow states to install these at public rest stops?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Speaking for AASHTO, I know that a number of states within the AASHTO organization are looking or would appreciate opportunities for allowing electric vehicle charging at rest areas. Speaking on behalf of Texas, I don't believe that that would be an area that we would be directly focused on. I think we recognize the importance of collaborating with the private sector to allow for electric vehicle charging infrastructure to be provided and implemented around the state, and that would be our first course of action, would be to look at existing private sector infrastructure as partners in that program.
Wouldn't it add to the area of anxiety relief for travelers?
Well, I believe each state has an opportunity to make their own decisions in that area, and so I think to the degree to which Congress can allow flexibility for those states to do that, I know that that would be welcome.
Okay, sir. Mr. Williams, Texas and my home state of California are both impacted by highway rail crossings and the safety and congestion issues associated with them. How important is highway grade crossing elimination program to the states?
They're very important, and I would say, too, that, you know, speaking for a state that has got 58,000 miles of, or I should say 88,000 miles of highway and 14,000 miles of Class 1 railroad, we have got a large number of at-grade railroad crossings. We get $20 million a year to address those, which is entirely insufficient. And so we're often supplementing those funds with state funds and flexibility with other federal program dollars to address them. We do appreciate as well the partnership that we have with Class 1 railroads, who often contribute some of their own funds to help address those needs. But there are large needs in that area, yes, ma'am.
All right. Ms. Hammond, in the past, we've heard fears of partisanship within discretionary grants. The idea that the Biden administration might play favorite or fail to award grants to rural areas or refuse to award grants to highway projects. Your testimony finds that isn't the case. Can you speak to what the organization has learned about how the administration has distributed funds under the discretionary programs, infra and race?
Thank you, Congresswoman. The data that we collect at the ARTBA dashboard, and I encourage you, any of you, to go look at it at any time, not just the materials we provided today, really is identifying the kinds of benefits and areas where these discretionary grant investments are being made. We're seeing urban and rural investments made. We're seeing freight investments, highway safety investments, and a number of community enhancement investments as well. So I would say that so far, we're pleased with how the administration is distributing funds. We're not seeing favoritism, but we're seeing much and long-needed investments being attended to through some of these targeted discretionary funds, and also with our formula funds that states have flexibility with.
And this help the communities that are at risk or that are low income?
Excuse me?
This helped many communities that are at risk and at low income?
Yes, yes. And I mentioned before the issue of some of the impacts that our investments and major interstate construction specifically have caused for communities over the years. And this is a 50, 60-year challenge and issue. And one of the benefits of what we're seeing in the industry now is not just through discretionary grants, but our state DOT partners and our local agencies are looking hard at how to reduce and mitigate the impacts that have been caused, reconnecting communities, not just communities of color, but low-income communities that were severed and impacted greatly in the past.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Mann, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. I represent the big first district of Kansas, 60 primarily rural counties in western and central parts of our state where transportation infrastructure is vitally important. We have a lot of agriculture, a lot of roads and bridges. We've got to have the infrastructure in place to get our ag products out of fields, away from feed yards, and to the mouths that will consume them. As a geographic center of the United States, Kansas offers excellent transportation advantages for several industries. But in order to maintain these advantages, it's imperative that our state's infrastructure is up to date. I've met with many of our road and bridge contractors all over Kansas. These are fantastic people, great Americans that are building and maintaining our infrastructure despite incredible challenges with labor, regulations, red tape that they cut and fight through every day. I believe strongly that everyone on this committee and everyone in Congress, whether we voted for the infrastructure bill or not, it's imperative that we oversee this thing to make sure that if we're going to spend $1.2 trillion, that we actually get $1.2 trillion of infrastructure for this nation and for the taxpayers in return. My question, first question for you, Mr. Boyd, can you elaborate specifically on the permitting challenges that you see and how does it impact project costs?
First of all, thank you for visiting Ash Grove Cement Plant.
Yep.
Back in your home state, so thank you for that. Back to what I said earlier about permitting issues is, from a contractor perspective, we're ready to go to work, and to see the DOTs delay projects because of permitting, obviously it causes workforce issues, because we need to hire people, we need to put them to work. We don't need to be waiting. And so we'd just like to see, obviously, more clarity in the permitting process to help speed up projects. From a contractor's perspective, that's what we'd like to see. Just more clarity and streamline the permitting process.
And when you look at a project cost, generally speaking, how much do you, it's going to vary widely by project, I understand, but if it's a $10 million project, how much typically goes to permitting, regulations, the compliance side of the job, so to speak, in your mind?
I'm going to kind of look at Mark. I would say 10%, 15%.
It's probably a fair, yes. And the time delay is, the time involved, especially for environmental approval, is often as much as it takes to construct the project itself.
Yep, and I think that's important for us to remember, especially when we're in an inflationary environment. Delays cost money and costs are increasing, and you all are trying to manage the bid that you made. You got to bid high knowing that the costs are moving underneath your feet while you're experiencing these delays.
Yeah, I mean, and so if the Texas DOT had a project they were ready to bid 2 years ago, but they weren't able to because of some kind of permitting issues, today that same project's probably 20+% more than it would have been 2 years ago.
There you go. So you would think about spending $1.2 trillion, 10 to 20%. You know, we are hundreds of billions of dollars just in the permitting. And I just think it's important for this community to keep that front and center, and for the American taxpayer to understand that as well. A similar question for you, Mr. Dreher. Regulations like WOTUS, NEPA, all this stuff, what would be your perspective on what it really costs the industry and how much we're adding to project costs?
Get back to you with an answer on that, but just very similar to the permitting, just all the regulatory items, right, end up just driving up costs significantly, whether it's pre-construction or you know, on the job costs, right, at the end of the day. So.
Yeah, great. Well, with that, I yield back. I just think we got to be hyper-focused on making sure if we're going to spend $1.2 trillion, let's get $1.2 trillion of infrastructure in return for this great country while we move forward. So thank you for the time, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Johnson recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony today. In 2015, President Obama signed the FAST Act, which was the first federal law in over a decade to provide long-term funding certainty for surface transportation infrastructure planning and investment. Fast forward to 2021, and we saw President Biden sign the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act into law, furthering Democratic leadership's commitment to improving this nation's infrastructure that had been neglected for so long. We've seen many positive results in just the first year of implementation of the IIJA, including implementation of the largest federal investment in transit in this nation's history. In August of last year, the Federal Transit Administration announced funding for the Low or No Emission Vehicle Program. This program provides funding to help transit agencies buy or lease U.S.-built low or no emission vehicles, including related equipment and facilities. I was happy to hear that the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority received $19.3 million in grants to purchase 25 electric buses and charging infrastructure. Ms. Hammond, for decades, infrastructure in Georgia and other states has suffered from a systemic lack of investment. In fact, in 2021, the American Society of Civil Engineers gave Georgia a C grade in its infrastructure report. The historic Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is beginning to make real and positive impact on the lives of millions of Georgia residents while spurring economic development and creating a generation of good-paying union jobs, which positions Georgia to continue its significant role in building the 21st century economy in our great nation. Without federal funding, how would America be able to rebuild old and build new infrastructure to secure our future as a world economic leader?
In short, we wouldn't. I'd like to recognize that in Georgia and states across the country, state legislators are enacting state revenues to participate in and partner with the federal government in building our nation's infrastructure. So much progress has been made in recent years. I would say that we need to do this from both the federal, state, and local area and get our users involved in paying their fair share for the use of the system.
Thank you. The IIJA provides $50 million in funding for the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Supportive Services Program through 2026. Can you speak to the importance of this program in improving access of small businesses to compete as prime and subcontractors on federally assisted contracts?
I would say today you've heard the common theme of workforce challenges. There's not enough of us at any aspect of the transportation delivery process. The disadvantaged business programs are going to help bring new partners into the transportation delivery process. The more we can help people contribute to the mission that we're on to invest in our nation's infrastructure, the better. So I encourage more of these kinds of programs and the ability for disadvantaged businesses to come into the business.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, you testified earlier about the great work that the state of Texas is doing in terms of diversifying workforce. What is the state of Texas doing to encourage diversity in terms of businesses that are doing business in Texas?
Thank you, Congressman. You mentioned the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, and that has been one that we have been very invested in and growing over the past several years. As our program has grown, so too has our investment in disadvantaged business enterprises. One of the things that I would call attention to and ask that Congress and USDOT to continue to look at is just the threshold that's established for companies to remain qualified as disadvantaged businesses. As the inflation and the cost of projects has risen, so too does some of the criteria in terms of net worth and the receipts for those companies. Those two also need to keep up so we can keep those companies in the program and help them grow and become more established.
Excellent point. Thank you, Mr. Williams, and thank you all for your testimony. And with that, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman, and Mr. Yakima is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today to lend your expertise as we conduct this important hearing on IJA oversight and implementation. This legislation represented a significant investment in our nation's infrastructure, and such a significant investment carries with it a significant responsibility on the part of this committee to exercise oversight and make sure that we're being good stewards of our taxpayer dollars. This means ensuring that worthy projects are funded, that the administration is following legislative intent, and that projects have a smooth runway from initial concept all the way to the ribbon cutting. We also want to ensure that local governments with limited resources aren't so overwhelmed with burdensome regulation that they don't apply for funding and thus miss out on the opportunities that are created by this legislation. I wasn't in Congress when IJA was passed, but I want the Infrastructure and Jobs Investment Act to create quality infrastructure investment and jobs around the country, as well as my congressional district back in Indiana. And hearing the testimony today, it makes me concerned that we're not hitting some of those benchmarks. All of you talked about the impact of inflation, which is the single top issue I've heard inside my district when traveling around the district for my constituents. One of the first meetings I had as a member of Congress was actually with a regional planning authority who told me that inflation created a $10 million shortfall for an important overpass project that they wanted to do inside my district. $10 million is a rounding error for the federal government. But for Indiana's 2nd Congressional District and some of these local municipalities, it's real money. And it's oftentimes real money that they don't have. So the question becomes, what do? Do they take on more debt at a time of rising interest rates? Do they postpone the project and direct funding to other projects? Or do they just scrap the project altogether? It's truly a menu of bad options for local governments, state governments, and municipalities. Inflation is sand in the gears that's reducing the effectiveness of IJA. But I have some other concerns on implementation as well. Specifically, Mr. Boyd, you mentioned the OMB's confusing and contradicting Buy American rule that may end up upending a lot of the groundwork that assumed that the administration would follow congressional intent. Will this rule, as presently written, and the seemingly unnecessary confusion it has created, increase or decrease the cost of infrastructure projects?
Obviously, it's going to increase the cost. If the exclusions are not made for the bill of materials that we've requested, costs will go up.
Thank you. Will it speed up or slow down the cost of infrastructure projects?
It's going to slow down.
Will it increase or decrease the number of infrastructure projects that can be completed?
It's obviously going to reduce the projects.
And do you believe that this rule will increase or decrease the effectiveness of IJA?
It'll decrease it.
Thank you, Mr. Boyd. Ms. Hammond, you talked about the challenges of permitting and how it takes 5 to 7 years on average to complete just an average environmental review for a federal aid transportation project. And that's nothing to speak of lawsuits or other litigation that may come their way and have to work through the court system before going fully under construction. You know that the White House's Council on Environmental Quality is rolling back NEPA reforms. And I want to ask you the same question as Mr. Boyd. Will the White House's NEPA reform rollback increase or decrease the cost of infrastructure projects?
I'm not sure I can answer that. I don't totally understand the reform rollback you're mentioning.
Okay, great. Thank you, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman, and recognize Ms. Brownlee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hammond, you mentioned this morning the recent accident in Baltimore, and in your testimony, you also mentioned the need for what you called positive separation to help reduce work zone accidents. Can you elaborate a bit on what that entails and how it will improve safety?
Certainly. If you consider a highway, heavy traveled highway or freeway, and when inevitably you're widening that road, it's always under traffic. And so as the states and the local agencies are making their construction projects available, one of the things that we're all talking about is how to keep our workers safe, not just contractors, but our state employees as well. And so positive separation really means median barrier or Jersey barrier, as you see often. That doesn't solve every problem. States are investing more in impact attenuators to protect their workers, but the more kinds of precautions we can take like that, in addition to speed enforcement in work zones, there's great gains there we need to continue, as well as the education of our drivers, which IIJA provides for. And then enforcement in general is critical as we put people's lives at risk every day on the road.
Thank you for that. And again, to ask an entirely different question, Ms. Hammond, what are your organizations doing specifically to help recruit and retain women in construction?
Personally, I've just recently been the chair of WTS, which is Women in Transportation, an association that it's really been working to advance women in transportation throughout their careers. I've been in this industry for 44 years. It's been pretty lonely, I will admit, at times. We don't get to see, or nor can we, have we effectively, all of us, marketed transportation careers to not just men and not just engineers and planners, but to the wealth of disciplines that are necessary to pull off the kinds of transportation investments we're making for communities. So I think we need better coordination amongst all of us looking to expand our workforce and build a diverse workforce that truly represents the citizens that we serve.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Mr. Williams, in your testimony, you noted that some rural states are seeking flexibility in the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. Can you elaborate on that a bit, on some of the specific challenges rural states are having and what specific flexibilities are you seeking?
Thank you, Congresswoman. So specifically, Texas, along with several other rural states, Montana and a few others, have asked for flexibility in the 50-mile placement requirement for electric vehicle charging stations. We believe that the location of those should be somewhat market-driven in areas while still addressing equity and the effective distribution of those, but it's going to be costly in some areas of the state, in Texas and other locations, to potentially meet that 50-mile spacing requirement for electric vehicle charging. And so that was a specific reference that we were.
I see. And what you mentioned earlier with regards to your own state, you said you were going to really deal with the private sector in terms of building that infrastructure. Is that one of the limitations, that there's just not the private sector out there in the rural areas to partner with?
Yes, ma'am. Combination of that and just the market demand with vehicles in those areas as well. There have to be users, there have to be a market demand for those vehicles, for those charging stations to be maintained and profitable. State DOTs are not in the business of running gasoline stations or fuel or electric vehicle charging stations, so we have to work with the private sector if we're going to be successful with that program.
Thank you for that. And I just have a few seconds left. Mr. Dreyer, I'll ask you a quick question. You mentioned the need for new construction equipment in your testimony. And when your company looks at these new purchases, would you consider zero-emission heavy-duty vehicles in that process?
Absolutely. Whatever the most economical option is, certainly open to that, right, to reduce our carbon footprint.
Great. Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Edwards, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To all of you, thanks for sharing some time with us this morning. We appreciate it, and I know some of you came quite a distance. I'll begin with this question for the gentleman on the left, Mr. Williams. I can't see that far anymore, so thank you. There's a clear theme here that we are experiencing inflationary measures that are slowing projects down, making projects more expensive. We're experiencing supply chain interruptions. There are permitting issues. Because of those delays, how much of the $1.7 trillion in the IIJA might not be spent in any time that is required to be spent in that act?
Thank you, Congressman. So the delays is certainly going to translate into a longer time period over which the IIJA funding would be spent. Texas will certainly spend all of the money that is formula apportioned to the state of Texas. We're going to get the money out. The challenge is in the time frame and the expediency in being able to do that. And so the additional permitting requirements, regulatory requirements can add to that. Furthermore, they can also increase the cost of projects themselves. And so ultimately the buying power of federal funding has been diminished, and significantly so over the past couple of years in Texas, to the point that I made earlier that where it stands right now, we don't believe that the federal buying power that we have, even with the increase in funds through the IIJA, is as much as it was just 2 years ago.
And so what are the options when a project experiences these cost overruns? If a project's got $50 million assigned to it, we've now spent $50 million, but because of inflation and delays, it's going to require $75 million. What are the options at that point?
Well, there's no real good options. In some instances, the project may have to be scrapped. In other instances, the project may need to be rescoped. Or we have to find additional funds to cover the cost of that project, which means that another project somewhere else in the state is being delayed. So there's really no good options when we're in a situation where the cost of projects are growing so significantly.
And so you're telling us that a project might be scrapped. That means that money has been spent. In some cases, a tremendous amount of money has been spent, and somewhere along the line, we're just going to stop a project.
If we have to stop a project, it is going to result in money that has been wasted. Yes, sir.
All right. One of the things that I've not heard much talk about that I know takes place, and that is legal delays and expenses in projects. I know that many highway projects, bridge projects, for one reason or another, end up in litigation. Can you speak at all to the cost or the time involved in legal disputes that you've seen as a result of these projects?
Well, it's been a very real impact for Texas, as it has been for a number of states. Not to diminish the importance of ensuring that our projects align with state and federal laws, but as the congressman from Texas previously spoke about, we had a major project in Houston that was delayed by 2 years because of legal challenges that came about through that. And through that 2-year period, we had to work with the Federal Highway Administration and some of the local governments to address their concerns. But the outcome of that was basically the project that we had approved environmentally was approved to move forward. Only 2 years later, with the impact of additional inflation costs being put on top of that.
And so you've assigned a value, I think I heard maybe about 30% being added to a project because of inflation. Can you assign a value to the legal expenses and delays?
It's very difficult to do that because they take different forms, but I can say that it is very significant. We spoke about the inflation cost of 2 years of delay. Adding to that will translate into the hundreds of millions of dollars on the project that we referenced in Houston alone on that as a minimum. In addition to that, just the time and expense that goes in to the professional services and other fees that are involved in addressing the regulatory and permitting issues, the legal expenses that go into that. All of that factors in to drive up the cost of delivering highway infrastructure.
Gentleman's time's expired. Going to have to move on to Mr. Stanton's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Since its enactment 16 months ago, Arizona has received over $2.1 billion for roads, bridges, and other major projects under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Every corner of Arizona has been allocated. Every corner of Arizona is benefiting, and my district is no exception. $223 million has been allocated to reconstruct and expand the I-10 Broadway curve, one of the most heavily traveled sections of freeway in the entire region. This project, which runs through my congressional district, is the largest freeway reconstruction project in Arizona's history. It includes modified interchanges to improve traffic flow, added lane capacity, including high occupancy vehicle lanes, new bridges, and improved connections to Interstate 17. It will enhance safety, reduce travel times, increase access to our largest employers and other transportation options, supporting our growing population, and will have a significant economic impact. 1,400 new construction jobs and 250 long-term jobs. Mr. Boyd, in your testimony, you discuss how the products you mine and make in the aggregates industry are quite literally the building blocks for infrastructure projects like the I-10 Broadway curve, and how important it is to proactively manage these resources to ensure continued access. To build the infrastructure funded through this law, we must consider where our building materials are coming from and how we get them to construction sites. On this front, Arizona has led the way through smart policies to keep these resources accessible and affordable. Can you discuss the importance of the federal government being involved in preserving access to these resources and how important it is for the Federal Highway Administration to stand up the working group established under the law?
Thank you, Congressman. And I believe what you're probably referring to is the ROCKS Act.
Correct.
And I want to congratulate you and your team for being so forward-thinking on doing such. Obviously, from a infrastructure perspective, aggregates are going to be needed. From a water perspective, aggregates are going to be needed. And the longer we can plan out for our where such is going to come from, obviously, the better the DOTs, the local municipalities, even land developers can plan. And the cost of aggregates is one thing, transportation is the other. So the closer the aggregates are to the final home or their resting place, whether it be in a home or on a bridge or on a roadway, the less expensive these projects are going to be. So securing these pieces of property that have aggregate and protecting them is important, yes.
All right, good. And keeping those trucks off the road is good for the environment as well. So it's
Yes.
a win all around. As we make these investments in our nation's infrastructure, we cannot overlook the role inspections play in keeping our bridges and other critical infrastructure in the best shape possible. Drones are playing an increasingly pivotal role in the way we inspect infrastructure. So the next question is for Mr. Williams. Can you discuss the benefits of utilizing drones for inspections and how best Congress can support state DOTs in harnessing this technology?
Thank you, Congressman. The use of new technology across the board is vitally important, not only for speed and efficiency, but also safety. In Texas, we have what was established a couple of years ago as an urban air mobility task force that was established by our governor and the legislature to bring industry together, working with TxDOT to look at ways that we can utilize drone technology most effectively, and we are deploying that and making use of that within TxDOT. We have a regular training program for our personnel to learn how to effectively utilize and operate drones within FAA regulations, and we're seeing that deployed both in bridge inspections as well as in inspection of roadway projects. That also gives us an avenue to improve efficiency and safety for those personnel that may be tasked with being out in the roadway. If we can utilize drone technology to inspect our roads and minimize the amount of exposure that our staff may have, that's a benefit to us.
That's great. And I got a bill to try to better support small cities and smaller government entities and the tribal communities so they can get the benefits of drone technology as well for infrastructure investment. Looks like I've run out of time, so I'll yield back the rest of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Burleson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're looking good in that seat. I have a question for Mr. Dreyer. You mentioned in your testimony that the Biden administration has prioritized union contractors and on taxpayer-funded projects. Why do you believe the administration, I mean, this is just a basic question, why do you believe they're pursuing that policy?
The common theme today has been workforce shortage. By having that mandate in place, we're limiting competition, right? We're limiting the amount of open shop contractors that can bid that project. And the result is increased costs, right? It only exacerbates the current challenges that are facing us right now.
And those costs are bore on the taxpayer.
On the taxpayer, less competition, right? Challenges the workforce. leads to increased costs.
So would it be safe to say that we're getting less roads, getting less bridges, less infrastructure for our same dollars?
Yes, sir. And
Okay.
recently, we had some nice opportunities, nice projects that fit Chimbro very well. We had to pass on them because of the PLA mandates.
And the time delays that this might create, give me some real world.
Just the overall duration of the job, right? And just tying that back to workforce shortages and some of the permitting challenges. In our world, time is money, right? Any delays in the permit process, you bid a job, sometimes the permit, you don't get the permit until 3 months into it, ends up adding to the back end and drives up costs significantly.
Thank you. Mr. Boyd, I have a few questions for you, sir. Can you explain some of the permitting challenges that you're seeing?
I'm going to go back to earlier statement, going back to WOTUS, and that's been our biggest challenge from an aggregate industry. And it seems there's not been a lot of clarity around WOTUS, and it seems to be changing. From an aggregate facility, we're looking 10, 20 years out. And we don't need to make a financial decision or a business decision based on what is. And so we would like some clarity around WOTUS.
Well, I hear from farmers all the time about WOTUS, but can you elaborate on how it impacts you in aggregate?
Anytime you move dirt, anytime you do any stripping, clearing, whether it be trees or whatever, obviously you got to do some pre-work to see if you have blue streams, blue water, anything that would fall under WOTUS. So anytime you turn any dirt over, WOTUS seems to get involved.
Okay, so you can't, anytime you move dirt at all, you've got to get permitting for it.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on the importance of having construction materials excluded? I've noticed that in your testimony that you said that they were excluded in what was a bipartisan legislation, but the new rules threaten to have this aggregate material now included in the Buy America.
That's correct. The industry has asked for aggregates, cement, liquid asphalt, and other building materials to be excluded from Buy America. And the reason being is some of the country is unable to source those local materials, whether it be aggregates in the Gulf Coast area, liquid asphalt, which is the binder that goes in a hot mix, that has historically come from Canada. And if these products are not excluded, obviously there's going to be a significant increase in cost. Great possibility of projects not even being able to get done. Mm-hmm. And if they are get done, the transportation cost is probably going to make them not feasible.
Well, when I talked to people today, in fact, I talked to someone who was building a home, and they were shocked at the price of concrete. And so this would only exacerbate that problem.
Yes, it would. A lot of cement is imported.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Ohio, Mrs. Sykes, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the ranking member for organizing this meeting for us today. I am from Ohio, as it was indicated, and one of the reasons I wanted to be on this committee, and particularly this subcommittee, is because of all of the highway infrastructure in our state. And just in case you're not familiar, Ohio has 121,000 centerline miles. We're the 4th largest interstate system in the country, the 8th largest roadway network, and the 5th highest volume of traffic nationwide, according to the Ohio Department of Transportation. And even if I were to drill down a little bit into Ohio's 13th congressional district, where I'm from, where I represent, and knowing that we have a lot of construction needs statewide, also locally thinking of our Summit County High-Level Bridge, which is the bridge that connects Akron to Cuyahoga Falls over the Cuyahoga River. It's 220 feet high. It's 75 years old. It's 8 years older than the interstate highway system itself and needs some significant repair as we're looking at the civil engineers grading us a C minus for our infrastructure, which I think is probably a little generous. This bipartisan infrastructure law is incredibly important to our state, our economy, and our safety. And its implementation is incredibly important to me in my community. But one of the things I want to talk about is the permitting, the regulatory issues, because we've focused on that quite a bit. And this question, I'll ask all of you to answer very, very quickly, because I do only have a couple more minutes left. The Buy America, Build America program is important. I come from Akron, Ohio, where we literally built the tires and organized the ability for people to get to and from on that interstate system. Building in America, having my hometown, my friends and neighbors build things is not only important for our progress, our economy, our hope, our future, it is a big deal. And it's what made us build the best middle class in the country. What is the one thing that the administration could do to move the Buy America, Build America process along? Very specifically, not in general, we talk a lot in generalities. What very specifically can or should we be pushing for? And I'll start with you, Mr. Williams, just a few words.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Very specifically, I would say practical and reasonable waivers when those are necessary, and clear guidance for industry and states to adopt into our specifications.
Thank you, Mr. Boyd.
Just to make myself, CRH does support Buy America. And I guess to answer your question is to exclude the products that we ask to be excluded from a construction material standpoint.
Mr. Dreer.
A simplified waiver process during construction.
Ms. Hammond.
And I would say certainty of the rules.
Thank you. Thank you all for working with me and being so brief in your responses. So, Mr. Dreer, I heard you say PLAs were problematic for some of this work, and it caught my attention because in Ohio, we have bipartisan support for project labor agreements. We have consistently protected them through Republican governors, Democratic governors, Republican supermajority legislatures in Ohio. We have found this to be incredibly important for our state in building the infrastructure. And it is my understanding that PLAs are good because they help control construction costs, they help prevent overruns, they help ensure efficient completion of projects. And really one of the most important part is ensuring fair wages for people to work. Our most important valuable asset is the people we have in our communities, and giving them the ability for safe working conditions where they can earn enough money to continue to live in our communities is really one of the best parts about it. And so when I hear you criticize them, I take it very personally. When I think about the laborers in my community and the operating engineers and the folks who are working these projects knowing that they need those fair wages so they can bring them home to their families and participate in our economy. So tell me again why you are against project labor agreements, why you are against getting these fair wages and safe working conditions for our people, for the people that I represent in Ohio 13.
We work with union contractors all the time. We're not anti-union. However, there's certain provisions in these agreements that we can't agree to, right? We're paying dues, right, union dues that our workers won't see the benefits to after the project is complete, right? So overall, limiting the amount of competition when a project's advertised is only going to exacerbate the challenges that we have right now with the workforce shortage. Less contractors bidding a project results in increased costs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my time is up and I yield back.
All right, the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Stauber, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Inflation has and continues to be a detriment to all Americans. Let me paint a picture. Working class families struggle to put food on their table as their grocery bills skyrocket. So they go to work to put in more hours and hopefully take home more pay, but now they can't afford the materials to complete their projects. Since no one can afford materials for their projects, they get terminated or abandoned. Now, no one gets paid. a spiral of doom created by the reckless spending of this administration. The IIJA was supposed to be the largest investment in infrastructure in decades, but pair that with the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill, $700 billion spending bill, and the value simply erodes. Back home, I have been told over and over again that inflation has eaten up nearly all of the funding for our infrastructure projects. The status quo should not be acceptable to any of us. Mr. Dreer, can you describe in more detail how inflation has eroded the buying power of IIJA and the impact on your business?
So inflation has driven up costs, right? Costs are up, I think, over 40% in the last few years. And, you know, we've seen projects where we've bid, we're actually the low bidder and successful. And states don't award the job because, right, sometimes the budgets are done 5 years ago and, right, we're way over the budget. So sometimes the project gets shelved and you know, punted to another time or rescoped. So it just really limits the opportunity to, you know, execute these projects, build the bridges, and it's having a significant effect.
So would you say inflation and supply chains have been rather devastating?
Yeah, devastating, and also during construction, a lot of the challenges that we spoke about today, when we can't get a particular material because it doesn't meet the Buy America provisions, just adds to extended schedule, extended cost.
Right. Thank you. Changing gears a bit, I want to discuss permitting reform. Members on this committee, including myself, have spent months crafting legislation that will be on the floor this week that will streamline permitting for mining and infrastructure projects. Mr. Boyd, it's great to see you. Could you please explain how some of these reforms, if passed, would help advance infrastructure investments?
First of all, thank you for your leadership on H.R. 1. And CRH proudly supports you with this endeavor, so thank you. I'm just going to repeat what you said, streamlining the permitting. And
I'll repeat the question, Mr. Boyd. Can you please explain how some of these reforms, if passed, would help advance infrastructure investments?
It would obviously speed them up, which I think we said before on this panel that time is obviously money. And so I think that's the biggest impact, just speeding the projects up.
When you delay a project for, let's say, a year, you know, in northern Minnesota, our construction season is shorter, right? When you delay a project, if you delay a project because of the lengthy permitting process, if you delay it for one construction season, can you give us an idea what that additional cost would be?
I'm just going to go over a 38-year history, okay? So historically, it's been 3 to 5% a year.
Yep.
The last 2 years, it's been double digits, 15 to 20% more.
So 15 to 20% more in the last couple of years. That it costs more for investment in the infrastructure. And that's what I was getting at, the inflation. Is the inflation, in your opinion, you've got a lengthy career, is it inflation, in your opinion, causing some projects not to move forward because of the cost?
Yes, there's no doubt about that.
And many projects or just a few?
I wouldn't know a number. Obviously, these DOTs have a fixed budget, and so they're going to do as many projects as that money allows. So the more it costs, the less projects are getting done.
I think that the investment in our infrastructure is critically important, but with the inflation, we're not going to be able to have the buying power that we need. And with that, my time's up. Mr. Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Oregon, Ms. Hoyle, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. My first question is for Ms. Hammond, who I would like to point out is a graduate from Oregon State University, the land-grant school in the heart of my district. So, Ms. Hammond, your testimony notes that 37 states saw an increase in value and number of contracts awards for highway and bridge improvements over the last year. the value of state and local contracts also increased. Can you speak to the impacts of this increased government funding on private sector jobs in the construction industry?
Well, certainly, when we saw the contract awards stable or going down over the years, we see a loss in the ability for construction jobs. What we've seen in the last year, in 2022, for example, contract awards were up 24%. We actually think in our data that we're reviewing that inflation amounted for about half of that, so 12%. And in every region and state, it's different. So as these investments are rolling forward and through the rest of the Act, through the 5-year life of the Act, we're seeing people be able to not just come work on a job on a project, but that careers are being developed. We talked about the ability to bring more people into our industry for the long-term health of the industry and for delivery of ongoing future transportation. The importance of bringing people in for careers, high-paying jobs, and the ability to earn a living wage is just critically important. So we see that we're back on an uptick of investments, which mean jobs now and in the future.
Great, thank you. Previously, before being in Congress, I was a labor commissioner, statewide labor commissioner in Oregon, and worked a lot on expanding access to apprenticeships and getting into the building and construction trades. I think one of the worst things that we've done is stigmatized these jobs in that they're good jobs with good wages, with good pensions, and no college debt. And if you want to know how valuable those jobs are, just try and get a plumber or an electrician. So one of the things that we did, because you would never have someone go to college and not know what kind of program is good or bad, is before I left, I started working on a report card for all of our programs, and the current labor commissioner will be posting those so that we can have transparency about what programs have higher graduation rates, what programs, how much you can make after you graduate this program, whether or not there's a pension, how much it costs to go into the program, because transparency allows people to make a decision based on the merit of the program. I would say it's a merit-based decision, as it were. I will say, although I worked with open shops very well and I worked with union shops very well, the data that I have seen is that the union programs have better graduation rates. The union programs have higher employment rates. They have higher wages. So with this report card system, what I would encourage you, Mr. Dreyer, is once that's up, we'll get it over to you to look so that you can work with your programs. And if they're good, say, great job. And if not, see that if they can raise their standards so that we can have exceptional programs for people in the trades and have that be equal to a college degree. But my next question, actually that's a comment, not a question. Mr. Boyd, CRH is an employer in my district, provides good jobs, and it's a good place to work. I know a number of my constituents that work there. As we're talking, I know you've done a lot with workforce. Can you just speak to just the idea of how do we get the word out about jobs like the ones that you provide, that will provide good careers? How do we get the word out that this is a good option?
Riverbend Materials, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so thank you. We're making a conscious effort to start recruiting at a lot younger age, and even getting into the elementary schools and trying to introduce them to construction. We do a lot of job fairs where we may have equipment out there inviting young children to come sit on a piece of equipment or put on a hard hat or put on a safety vest, just trying to get some interest. I got a text from a customer yesterday, and he was reminding me, he's in the ready-mix business, and he was reminding me that he had concrete truck drivers in Memphis, Tennessee that made 6 figures last year. So that might not sound to a lot of money, but in Memphis, Tennessee, that's pretty good money. And so these young kids can make a living, a good living, and without having to go to college. And we're just trying to get that message out.
Thank you. Looking forward to working with you on that. And I yield back my time.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Lamalfa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Panelists, let me just go right down the line real fast. What percent of our atmosphere is CO2? Take your best guess. You don't have to be accurate. All down the line.
Repeat that question.
What percent of our atmosphere is CO2, carbon dioxide? Wild guess, it's okay.
I'll bite 5%.
5?
I'll just follow you then.
We'll go 7. That's my favorite number.
I'll see their 5 and suggest that we know that transportation causes 49% of CO2, so that's why we're all working on energy transition.
All right. So what number do you think it is?
5.
5? How about you? I didn't hear you, Mr. Dreyer.
7.
7. Did you have one, Mr. Boyd?
So we got a 5, 7,
This Price is Right.
8. I'm gonna
Okay.
get the high end.
All right. Well, I appreciate that, and I don't mean to put you on ice. I ask a lot of people that because all we hear is climate change, CO2, CO2. I heard a couple of you on the panel saying you're looking to change your vehicles to electric, even though we don't have the electric grid. And me as a farmer, I wouldn't be real happy about running out and replacing $300,000, $500,000, $1 million pieces of equipment because someone wants it to be electric. The answer is 0.04%. Not 1%, not a half of a percent. It's 0.04%, and it's gone up from 0.03 over the last couple decades. This is what we're being all contorted into doing, is this tiny change in CO2. If we get below 0.02, plant life starts dying off. So let me ask Mr. Boyd, what are a lot of your vehicles Tier 4 already, or the vehicles that you know about in the industry?
Yes.
All right, so that's the cleanest burning diesel equipment you can get, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. How about Mr. Dreyer? What do you think?
Yes.
Okay. So why would anybody be anxious to go out and change out all those vehicles that you've been upgrading? In my home state of California, CARB has eliminated lots of equipment. Trucks, we're down at least 70,000 truckers, and all because they don't make a mandate for a 2011 and newer vehicle. And so it's going to be harder to get things from the ports, all that. So anyway, I just wanted to underline that as we all get all giddy about trying to make everything electric, especially in my home state when they're shutting down the power grid and taking out hydroelectric dams, and they barely kept in place the nuclear power plant for an additional 5 years, which is 9% of our grid. I don't know how we're going to do this. I don't know how you guys are going to do construction out in remote areas where there isn't power lines yet nearby or what have you in order to charge this stuff. Maybe you'll bring generators. So anyway, thank you for letting me rant on that a little bit. Mr. Boyd, what are some of the challenges of trying to get permits to get stone, sand, and gravel available, especially like in places like California where just a few years ago, and I don't know what's current now, but in order to get these products into the Bay Area, they gave up getting it locally. They barged it in from British Columbia and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what we talked about a while ago on Buy America. Using your district as a great example, if these exclusions are not made on the construction materials end, I don't know how your district's going to get any projects done, just due to the permitting issues that you currently have. You have no other option but to bring it in outside of America.
From somewhere else, a long ways away, longer transportation, right?
Oh, no question.
Yeah. Mr. Dreyer, when we're talking about the Infrastructure Act here, where there was attempts in this committee, attempts in Congress to make it not what it ended up being, at least on the highway section, but get rid of the ability to add highway capacity, downgrading projects, and instead Secretary Buttigieg put in performance measurements to reduce CO2 and greenhouse gas from highway transportation. These are holding up projects. So this was supposed to be in the so-called Infrastructure Act that the president and Democrats pretty much did on their own in the last session. The House Republicans didn't have a lot of opportunity to help shape. So the intent of Congress ended up being, by the time it got through the House and the Senate, to do a bill that would be a little more broad in transportation projects. So give me your interpretation of what we ended up with if we can't add lanes and we can't do the things that are actually going to upgrade infrastructure. You're going to have to go fast, sorry.
I don't have any information on that question.
No info? Okay. Well, buying, again, like in my home state, they'll put out a new gas tax, for example, put that in place. And then by the time it gets passed, the voters have agreed to it. They pull the rug out from under them. It ends up going for bike paths, buying land and things like that. And it can't go for lane capacity expansion for infrastructure. They can barely keep the focus on fixing infrastructure we have, or certainly adding to it, like what real people want. So instead, we get high-speed rail, which is half of it's underwater in the Central Valley right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. DeSauer.
Thank you. That's good.
Yes, sir. 5 minutes.
You must have taken some high school French.
I'm from Georgia.
Mr. Williams, I wanted to follow up on your comments from Ms. Brownlee about infrastructure and renewables and alternative fuels, and I agree with you. But being from a big state like California and having had a role I was appointed by 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat to the California Air Resources Board, and I was a member of the California Transportation Commission, so we're aggressively moving. But in big states with urban, suburban, and rural areas, I agree with you, but getting that mix right with the private sector on the infrastructure as the fleet comes out is a real challenge. So I'd love to have a longer conversation with you, but how do you envision that? And this difficult part, as we've learned about particularly electric vehicles, is range anxiety. So somebody's traveling from Austin to San Antonio. I think we can do it that way by putting it strategically, but I wonder if you could respond to that and some of your challenges, given the diversity of your demands in Texas, like California.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Congressman, and we appreciate the partnership that we have working with my counterparts in California. And we as a large state, a diverse state, we face a lot of the same challenges. And one of the things that we believe is important if the EV charging, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure provisions of the IIJ are going to be effective, we're going to need to have some flexibility in where and how states locate those. And speaking from Texas's point of view, and I believe many other states are like that, we really see that the role of the private sector is going to be vitally important. We as a DOT don't have the mission or the ability to rely upon our state resources to maintain these electric vehicle charging stations. We've seen these charging stations already begin to be deployed across the state, as they've been also in California and many other locations. And so we know that the private sector industry has been able to begin doing that successfully. The provisions of the IIJA, in our view, in order to be able to get the biggest bang for the buck, to stretch those dollars more, our ability to work with private industry to have them step into the role of providing some of the federal match, maybe more than the federal match in some areas, and taking on the responsibility of, while we provide the oversight, maintain and deploy those vehicle charging stations, will allow those to be distributed more effectively.
And will make the overall drive, more successful rather than imposing it. I want to ask you another question. Similarly, places like Austin and San Francisco, where I'm from, eastern suburban urban district, a lot of employers don't want to go back to their old commute in places like that. There are professions that are particularly matched to that. So software engineers, even though we're laying a lot of them off in both of those areas. So some of the challenges you're having of accepting that there may be opportunity to cut down on congestion as we build out highways and sort of the partnership, I would say, with other modes, with heavy rail, light rail, buses, pedestrian bikes. We need a lot of research, but we don't have the opportunity in many ways to take advantage of this. So it's sort of the opposite of induced demand from my perspective is if you can get a 2-income household to get 2 days a week to work 410s and still be as productive. So I was wondering your experience again, since you have similar constituencies in places like Austin to San Francisco. What are you finding?
Well, we certainly see that vehicle miles of travel has increased in Texas, now above pre-pandemic levels. So the people have come back. They're driving differently, so the peak period has spread out. I think we're seeing that many workers, even those that are returning and working in the office, are taking the opportunity to have some flexibility in their workday and to leave earlier or return later from home and still recognize the ability to be productive in some instances from a remote location. And so we see that in some of our own personnel. We're seeing that in the transportation industry, particularly in the professional services sector as well.
Well, I would suggest this is one of those instances where Texas and California has more, practically speaking, on the infrastructure rollout in common, rather than a lot of the politics we talk about that seem to divide it. Thank you so much.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Williams, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My district in Central New York is full of people that work, that are workers. Not nearly as many work-from-home opportunities, and they rely on the infrastructure that we provide. And it's our job to provide that for them. Mr. Dreher and Mr. Boyd, I've spoken to many members of your respective associations, a lot of representation in my district, and they're excited to get to work on infrastructure-related projects in Central New York and the Mohawk Valley. We have a lot going on there. It's a very exciting time. However, one of the problems we run into, this is going to be shocking, particularly in New York, is the highly litigious legal environment in our country. The notorious New York scaffold law comes to mind. That one piece of legislation actually adds 8 to 10% on overhead on every single construction project in my state. If you can imagine 8% fewer roads, 8% more potholes, 8% fewer bridges that get repaired in a timely manner, you can see that creates quite a drag. Even Secretary Buttigieg has spoken on this issue. So it seems like it would be a bipartisan issue. Gentlemen, either of you or both of you, how would meaningful tort reform affect our country's ability to improve our infrastructure? Can you correlate those two?
Impact on the business. We truck a lot of material, whether we truck in incoming material or truck in outgoing material. And trucks obviously is a liability on the road. And having some type of tort reform to reduce some of that liability would obviously reduce cost and be very, very beneficial to business.
I assume that it would be beneficial to taxpayers that expect to get more out of their investment in infrastructure.
Correct.
Mr. Dreher,
Tax dollars will obviously go further.
Sir? I'm sorry?
Tax dollars would obviously go further.
Okay. It looks like we're facing a lot of headwind on inflation. I've heard that testimony in your comments, and we seem to be spending a lot and getting a whole lot less. It's very concerning. Can you speak specifically, either of you or both of you, to the premiums that your businesses pay or your members pay? What is the set-aside? What's the overhead that they set aside for these kinds of liability tort issues overall? Can you quantify that or define that in any way?
I cannot quantify it for my business, no, sir.
Okay. I'll just comment for a moment that the scaffold law, we're doing a replacement of the Tappan Zee Bridge, work on the Tappan Zee Bridge in New York State, not in my district, but a critical piece of infrastructure. And it is estimated that this single rule that is unique to New York State, by the way. So if this was really a worker safety issue, if this was really something that that the world was crying for to protect workers, which of course is very important, then it would be universal. And yet it exists alone in New York State. The Tappan Zee Bridge project will have incurred up to $200 million of additional expense due to the scaffold law. And I find that pretty shocking waste of critical resources that frankly we need. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you for your answers.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Ryan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon now to all of you. Thank you for being here and taking your time. First question, through January 2023, states have already launched 36,400 projects with IIJA formula funds going towards all kinds of projects, but I'm particularly focused on rural and small communities like the one that I represent in upstate New York, which I think often just would not even be in a position to have these funds without something like IIJA. So I wanted to ask for anyone, but particularly directed to Ms. Hammond to start. Highway funding from IIJA will be used to help construct and expand Route 17 and Route 86 in my district, which anyone who's driven will tell you is in desperate need. Can you discuss how federal funding provided by the law will benefit rural communities specifically, starting with Ms. Hammond, and open up to anyone else?
Thank you for the question. One of the things we haven't talked a lot about today is what the money is being spent on. What we know in our data at ARTBA and the collection of the projects underway is that about 2% of those projects are greenfield or brand new corridor types of construction. But importantly, 46% of the funds, excuse me, to date are being spent to repair, rehabilitate, and modernize roads and bridges around the country, both in urban and rural areas. Rural areas oftentimes see a higher run-off-the-road safety risk for two-lane roadways. And the safety investments, the rehabilitation and modernization projects that are being spent are truly making our infrastructure safer.
Thank you. And open up to anyone else to add. I'll just say, as anybody's thinking, to your point, Ms. Hammond, this project in my community, I'm 41 years old. We've been waiting for this essentially my whole life. And we would not be able to do this without IIJA.
I think what you said, I think what this does is highlight the flexibilities that the DOTs have to do with this money. And I think it's very important that the DOTs do have that flexibility and they can use the money where they see fit. So I think that may be why the job's getting done.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to echo the emphasis on rural areas in Texas. We have the highest rural population of any state since 2016 through federal funding, and then also combine that with state funding. We've increased our investment in our rural areas by over 600%. As noted, the fatality rate in those rural areas is usually double what we see in urban areas, so it's very important for us.
I commend you, and as an upstate New Yorker, I appreciate the rural investment. Sir, yeah.
From a contractor's perspective, it's extremely exciting, right? There's so much work out there, and I think it's important to continue to keep the playing field open, right? Union and non-union contractors alike, to really control those costs and you know, give the best overall benefit to the American taxpayer.
I'll save my time and not debate you on that topic, sir, but your point is taken. Follow-on question to all of you. As I said, I think going back to Eisenhower, this is the most significant investment. I'm a glass half full kind of person. I think we should be tremendously proud that we've, in a bipartisan way, to remind all my colleagues, gotten this done. It's always room to improve. But I want to ask everybody, if Congress had not enacted the IIJA, how would your members, your departments be doing right now? What would be the trade-off had we not done this?
Just say from state DOT's perspective, we do appreciate the increase in formula apportionment dollars that has come. It was a 20% increase in our federal program. It was about a 6% increase overall. Every dollar helps. And when we're facing a time right now where we've seen rising costs, it's vital that we try to put as much money to work as possible, and flexibility within the provisions of the IIJA are important for that.
And just to build, unless anyone else wanted to add on that question, is it fair to think that in some regards the certainty of federal funding helps to somewhat buffer the inflationary challenges, which we all recognize are certainly real and affect specific projects, but is there some upside there to anyone?
If I could just reinforce the fact that the certainty and the sustainable program over the 5 years and hopefully beyond gives state DOTs and others the ability to plan for and make those investments that are needed. We've had a big drought in our infrastructure investment for many years. This is finally getting the ball rolling, and we hope it continues.
Thank you, and I'm sorry I went over, Mr. Chair.
That's all right. Chair now recognizes, I guess, myself, Collins from Georgia, for 5 minutes. Just to let you know, I am new here. It's my freshman year. I've spent 30 years in the trucking industry. I'm the owner of a trucking company. So I've got 30 years between these ears of getting beaten to death and with rules, regs, taxes, and I'd like to think that we came up here with that knowledge to help get things fixed. So I want to try to summarize some things from what I've been hearing all morning. First of all, we got a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. $529 billion of it went to transportation, and that's it. The rest of it is tied up in Green New Deals and wasteful spending. EV charging stations that my Democrat representative from Georgia talked about in Atlanta, and EV buses. That's not going to do anything for congestion. And that's a huge problem in my area, in the state of Georgia. We've got an agency that's focused on social issues from the top down instead of hiring people for doing the job. We've got a federal government that's been giving away money left and right that's been causing inflation. The other thing that's been causing inflation is the fact that we've gone from energy independent to energy dependent, and your gas is up and your diesel's up. We've also I've heard it here this morning over and over, overreach. Whether it's rules and regulations or agencies out there with this WOTUS rule, permitting problems, we've got tremendous problems. It seems like we've caused the problem here. So, Mr. Williams, I'd like to just briefly ask, do we need to hire people based on their abilities, their experience, and their expertise?
Absolutely, yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Boyd, congestion. We live it every day in Atlanta. Will congestion help in reducing the number of trucks that are needed on the road?
Congestion won't help.
If we reduce congestion.
Oh, yes, it would, yes.
Thank you. And also, rules in place that we have right now. You know, we just had a new rule that you had to pay to get your commercial driver's license.
Correct.
We also have stuck with the age 21 driving minimum for interstate commerce and interstate driving. If we reduce those two things or went back to the way it was, would that help increase the amount of people you need in the workforce out there?
It would. It would give us the ability to hire more drivers. It would also put more in the field of being a driver, yes.
Would you say trucks are safer today than what they were 20 years ago?
Absolutely.
And I heard Mr. Williams from New York, he was talking about tort reform. And I'd like to just follow up with you for a minute on that. Tort reform is reflected in a number of our insurance out there, is it not?
Yes, it is.
Would you say it's had a huge impact on workers' comp?
Yes.
What about auto liability?
Yes.
And general liability?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Hammond, inflation's hit a high, it's set a record right now.
And what do you think Congress can do to offset the cost of those inflation on these projects?
Well, I think we've talked a bit about that today. One of the things we would like is the continuation of your committee's oversight on the delivery of the program to ensure that it's being delivered as intent and that it's rapidly getting out to the construction workers on the road. Let's get these projects built, number one. The other issue is in areas where we have flexibility or decisions yet to be made on Buy America. Let's make sure that we're putting practical and realistic goals in place and waivers so that in this time of transition, as we rebuild America's manufacturing capabilities, that we don't slow down projects as a result. Having the waivers in place that enable us to make this transition would be great. Projects will be delivered sooner.
Thank you. I'd like to add to that that if we would move some of that Green New Deal money over to true infrastructure projects and get our roads and bridges fixed and reduce this congestion, that would be a huge help. And the other thing is, I think we need to unleash our American oil and produce our own oil here and get off of that energy independent. With that, I yield back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Washington, gentlelady from Washington.
Gentlewoman.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
It's all right.
Told you I was new here.
You're doing really well.
Ms. Strickland from Washington for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Crawford and Ranking Member Holmes Norton. The bipartisan infrastructure law is indeed working. In my home state of Washington, the state has already committed over $152 million in federal funds for highway and bridge projects. In Washington State's 10th Congressional District, that includes funding for the State Route 167 interchange project between Interstate 5 and State Route 509, replacing the 70th Avenue overpass at I-5 and the X Street roundabout. And what's interesting about these projects is that they create jobs for both the public and private sector, and they're integral to helping our ports be more effective to move goods. These projects benefit commuters, families, and workers through strong provisions in the bipartisan infrastructure law. And I'm very thrilled today to see that we have Ms. Paula Hammond testifying today, who's the former secretary of the Washington State Department of Transportation, who can speak to this transformative investment. So Ms. Hammond, I will start here. Through your lens as the former leader of the Washington State Department of Transportation and now as the 2023 chair of ARTBA, how have both the private and public sectors benefited from implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure law in Washington State?
Congresswoman Strickland, you know how long in Washington State alone, every state's probably similar, we've been trying to make the investments to maintain the assets we have, but also build for the future. The transportation needs in our country are changing, travel patterns are changing. We're using new technology, which is bringing much more efficiency to our transportation system. And I would add that the investments in transit and the partnership between highway agencies and transit agencies is bringing a whole new approach to having the ability to move more people, which then frees up congested freeways for goods movement. So we have some very important projects in our state that we've been trying to get to for many years, and this Investment Act is helping us now finally make those investments. It takes both a federal and state partnership.
Absolutely, and during my time as mayor of Tacoma from 2010 to 2017, we would often say, when is infrastructure going to happen? So I'm very honored that the 117th did pass this. Ms. Hammond, one thing I like to focus on too is we're making these huge investments, and we talked about jobs and wealth creation. And can you talk a bit about how we make sure that minority-owned contractors, women, minorities, veterans, and other underrepresented groups are going to get access to some of this growth?
We have recognized that we have a workforce challenge in general in our industry, and we're competing with other industries that are in a growth mode as well. The kinds of programs that the Infrastructure Act is providing is helping DBEs and MWBEs get into the business of supporting transportation. So the more we can work to expand, to train workers, to work towards the trades kinds of careers that folks can have. And the more we look to bring others into the industry, the better off we're all going to be for the long term. This is an investment for the decades to come.
Great, thank you. I want to pivot a bit and talk about workforce challenges in the private sector. And I'd like to start with you, Mr. Boyd. What can we do to help the private sector hire more people and create more jobs?
One of the things I talked about in my opening statement was some federal support from a vocational training perspective. Any way the federal government could help us expand vocational training, it'd be greatly appreciated.
All right, thank you very much. And, you know, I have talked to a lot of different private sector employers in just about every single sector, from healthcare to transportation to manufacturing. And a very common theme that comes up is that even if we filled every job with every American worker, we'd have all these job vacancies. So one of the things that I hope we're able to do together as a Congress is to really look at immigration reform in a very thoughtful, smart way so that we're able to get things built and really put this money to work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Mr. Duarte from California.
Hello. Like the very handsome gentleman before me, I'm also new to Congress and from a business, agricultural, and farming background. He's from trucking, but more similar than different. If I buy a cheeseburger or a pair of shoes online, I get asked, "How was your experience?" 1 star, 2 stars, 3, 4 star, 5 stars, right? Get extra credit, maybe in a raffle if I give comments. Ms. Hammond, you work with a group that represents national construction companies. Are there ever any opportunities for the companies that are affected or the local councils of government that want to get these projects built to give feedback, give comment, rate their local agency offices, which ones are easy to work with, which ones are rational, which ones are problem solution oriented, which ones are just a pain or don't get back altogether? Do you ever get that opportunity?
I had lots of opportunities like that when I worked at the state DOT to hear from our constituents. We often get feedback from the public or our local leaders on a project-specific basis. And the more us states know, or the DOTs at the time, knew that we were meeting their needs, the better off and more effective we could be on the next project. So
Sure.
sometimes state DOTs and or legislators will ask, how are we doing?
Let me ask him, the general panel, another question. I'll take
Yeah.
answers as they come. Would it be helpful, in your opinions, to set up a structured feedback process so that every agency office, every state and local office of whatever the regulatory agencies is getting feedback from, again, the local governments, the local councils of government, the local project construction companies, so that oversight hearings like this could be more productive, find the best practices. This administration or a subsequent administration could review that feedback and focus on where things are going right and try and deal with where things are going less correctly?
Yes, as long as it's productive, and social media certainly shows us some of the downside of anonymous comments, but yes, I think
Anonymous or not, anonymous is always an option, I guess, but go, the others, please.
I think 100% agree. I think the more that we can work together, the better off, right, in terms of the delivery of the project, removing, roadblocks, and just working together, right? I think that's really a good idea.
I think it's an outstanding idea. Just like we do as a business. I mean, we send out those surveys and obviously want to know what our customers think and what we can do, ways we can improve. It's a great tool.
People are our customers, and we welcome feedback. We welcome feedback at all levels, and we often go out and seek that. That gives us, as was mentioned, the opportunity to improve. And so good or bad, it always is something we can build on.
Well, I am speaking, you're with the Texas Department of Transportation. So are you aware, Mr. Williams, of any current programs in states that you're familiar with that solicit? And again, when you solicit it uniformly, you then have responses, and you can at least begin to think that you've got a uniform survey methodology that you can then act on, again, either in congressional oversight or in the current administration or future administrations. We could better surface problems if if we have a structured survey of how these agencies are performing?
We've certainly undertaken those efforts in our own agency to receive public comment on how we do as a Department of Transportation, and I would imagine, while I can't speak to specifics, that some of our other DOT partners do the same in different forms.
Excellent. That was my main question. I'll take any other further thoughts on that you folks have, or I'll get you.
Just from the contractor side again, some of the DOTs that we work with actually will encourage contractor involvement during the permitting process and design process. And again, the overall value to the end user is it's a benefit, right?
So you see some best practices out there,
Absolutely.
but they're not uniform best practices.
That's correct.
And so a survey or a feedback process would allow us to establish better, more uniform direct practices. So all this bang for the buck and, getting room for improvement stuff could then have a formal process that, again, would allow political entities to kind of help manage with a bit more information, a bit broader survey. As thankful as we are for the four of you today, a formal process would be just fantastic also, in my opinion.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'll yield back.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Mr. Allred from Texas.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank our witnesses for being here to talk about the historic investments that we've made as part of the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act. I think Texas has received as much as anybody. I think we were one of the biggest recipients from this legislation. In fact, over the 5 years, we're going to receive $27.84 billion for improvements to our roadways and our bridges. We've already received 9 discretionary IIJA grants valued at over $104 million. In my district alone, in fiscal year 23, we received $12.75 million as in IIJA commitments for highways and bridge projects. It's supporting 1 new project in fiscal year 23, 6 projects in fiscal year 22, and those 6 projects represent $234.8 million for projects for new roads, interchange improvements, rehabilitating existing roadways, right-of-way improvements, traffic signal installation improvements, improving pedestrian lighting. If you're in my district, the IIJA is helping you right now, and it's also creating jobs. And so it was the right thing to do. And Mr. Williams, I was really interested in a couple things in your testimony. Thank you for being here. It's always great working with TxDOT. You highlighted how we are implementing what I think is an impressive plan to build out an electric vehicle charging network in Texas. Thanks in large parts of the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program, Texas is going to receive $60 million in 2022, the most of any state, to help us meet our goal of expanding access to electric vehicles. Is there anything you want to highlight as lessons learned as you continue to implement this program, especially in regards to working with our state energy officials and the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation?
Good to see you again, Congressman, and thank you for the opportunity to respond to your question. Certainly, anytime we're looking at formula apportionments, because we have the biggest highway system and the most users on that highway system, Texas is typically going to be at the top of the list in terms of the amount of funding distribution that we received. And so that was reflected in the apportionment program for the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. In total, we'll see about $400 million coming to Texas for that program. And one of the things that is going to be very important for us to be able to administer that effectively is to have flexibility in where and how those vehicle charging stations are located, to be able to have flexibility also in the contracting methods. We see that it's going to be very important for us to be able to work effectively with the private sector in order for that to be successful. They're going to be the ones that will house those stations and be partners with us in deploying and maintaining those stations. So those flexibility is probably the most important point of emphasis that I would point to make that program successful for us.
I completely agree with you, and I think that's what people want to see. I also want to have local input as much as they can in terms of the placement of this, but to get $400 million for Texas for us to implement this, I think is enormous. As you know, in our state, range anxiety for an electric vehicle is a real thing. If you want to drive across our state, you need to have this network, and if we're going to move in that direction, I think it's really important. I've met also with a lot of our folks from your office about what we're doing to try to reduce and make our roadways safer and to reduce our roadway fatalities. Unfortunately, as you know, we've not had a single day without a roadway fatality since November 7th, 2000. And it's a tragedy, and we are working together to try to address that. I noticed in your testimony you discussed how the IIJ funding could help with that, but how does TxDOT or other state DOTs plan to leverage these safety resources to address making our roadways safer?
Thank you again, Congressman. As you are aware, the Dallas-Fort Worth region has one of the biggest metropolitan planning organizations in the nation, the North Central Texas Council of Governments. One of the initiatives that our commission launched was a task force between TxDOT and our MPOs across the state to look at how we can work together to combine the various funding sources, many coming from the IIJA, many coming from state sources, to really be on the same page in addressing really the critical rise that we've seen in fatalities across the nation and in Texas.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your testimony. I don't have time to ask my other questions, but to the other witnesses, thank you for sharing your expertise. Your testimony was enlightening, and I yield back.
Thank you. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Like my predecessors, I want to thank everybody here for joining us today. It's clear that both the panel of witnesses as well as the members of the committee care a great deal and have concerns about the high inflation levels as well as severe workforce shortages. And so I would like to start with my first question for Mr. Boyd. CRH and your industry are essential in executing infrastructure investments. In my district, the aggregate industry has 12 locations where you are producing materials to build infrastructure projects like the new Gateway Tunnel that will greatly increase rail capacity, or flood control projects that protect our communities. What is the greatest challenge you face in getting these materials to job sites so we can see the infrastructure benefits realized?
Could you repeat the last sentence? I can do it.
What is the greatest challenge you face in getting these materials to job sites so we can see the infrastructure benefits materialize?
So our greatest challenge in getting the materials is to start with permitting issues in different parts. And if a quarry or aggregate facility is permitted, the other challenge is obviously transportation, whether it be truck, rail, barge. That's the other issues as far as getting materials to the job. And I don't know if that's kind of the direct, I don't know if it answers your question, or was you looking for more, or what?
I think that's a good enough answer, because if we're looking at the real solutions over time, we need to be focusing on understanding it's both construction as well as getting the product to market to ensure that we can keep our communities safer and the transportation infrastructure needs are met in full. If there are other members of the panel who have an answer or want to opine on that, I'd welcome that. Mr. Williams?
Congressman,
please.
thank you. I would just capture that in terms of certainty of supply chain. When we're working with our contracting industry, we rely upon to bid on our projects, and there is uncertainty in their supply chain. If there's uncertainty about many of these projects will take 2, 3, 4 years to develop. If they don't know where that material is going to be over the next 2 or 3 or 4 years, you're going to see a significant increase in pricing that we're having to pay. And so the degree to which we can have a certainty in where that material is going to come from, be it aggregate or asphalt or steel, that's going to help us better see more competition and reduce our pricing and the inflation that we've been experiencing.
Anybody else on the panel have?
Just additionally, right, uncertainty drives up costs when we're bidding the job, but also during construction, not having a good handle on when materials are arriving and just the uncertainty impacts the schedule, right? Again, drives up costs, time is money.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Hammond?
I think all of the above. The more ability that contractors have to plan for and procure the items, and with the knowledge that the project is going forth on the pace that they anticipated, the better off we all are.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back to myself the remainder of the time. Mr. Moulton from Massachusetts.
Great. Well, thank you. Let me just start by thanking all the witnesses for being here. I'm sure you must have a certain feeling of dread every time a new member walks in at the end here to ask more questions. We recognize this is a bit of a marathon, but we certainly appreciate it. Mr. Williams, I spent some time in Texas myself and wondering if I might start with you. Certainly when I was there, traffic congestion was a big problem. Is it still a huge challenge facing Texas?
Yes, sir. Texas, year after year, adds more people than any other state in the nation. Those people tend to come with their cars and trucks, and that compounds the congestion that we see on our highways.
So I'm told that Texas DOT, I don't know if this applies to you personally, but I'm told that TxDOT currently believes that widening the Katy Freeway did not create more congestion, even though empirical data shows otherwise. 2008, the freeway was expanded to 28 lanes, making it one of the widest in the world. The project was immediately hailed as a success, and commute times were initially shortened, but within 5 years, peak hour travel times were longer than before the expansion. From 2011 to 2014, a morning commute in the freeway has increased by 25 minutes or 30%. Afternoon commute has increased by 55%. And sort of writ large in America, we've done capital projects, highway projects in urban areas to the tune of about $500 billion between 93 and 2017, which has caused congestion to grow by more than 144%, far faster than population growth due to induced demand. So given that induced demand means that congestion outpaces population growth, are you looking at alternatives, or are you still just planning to widen highways as wide as they can get?
Thank you, Congressman. Well, we certainly realize that to have an effective multimodal transportation system, we have to work with other agencies as well who are responsible for those modes, be it transit, and in Texas, a very important factor is freight. In fact, freight demand has grown by 3 times the rate of population demand, and as I testified previously, we're one of the fastest growing states in the nation. I would push back on some of the data on the Katy Freeway. Some of that is selectively chosen and doesn't realize or recognize the fact that some of those dates and the data that they're pointing to, there was adjoining highway construction going on parallel corridors that actually had to divert traffic. So some of that induced demand isn't something that I would characterize as induced demand, but in reality, it's diverted demand, often coming from other facilities.
But you do believe in induced demand, you understand?
I believe that there is some induced demand. I believe that some of the opponents vastly
So in
overstate that.
2019, to your point about freight, Virginia analyzed transportation options for I-95. From Fairfax County to Fredericksburg, the most congested stretch of highway in the entire United States. And they determined that adding a traffic lane would cost $12.6 billion, and within 10 years would bring little to no congestion improvements because of induced demand. Instead, what the state chose to do, or the Commonwealth chose to do, I should say, is invest $3.7 billion in expanding commuter rail, Amtrak service, and easing traffic choke points between Richmond and Washington, D.C. to the benefit not only of commuters, passengers, but also to freight traffic. This option costs nearly $10 billion less and has gotten a lot of freight off 95. I mean, do you think it's crazy for Virginia to do this?
Not at all. I think that each state DOT, as they look at their individual projects, have to analyze the demands on those that's causing those and make the right decisions for those projects in those corridors.
I mean, where I live in Massachusetts, I can drive into the city at rush hour. It takes between 75 and 90 minutes, sometimes a little bit more. The train takes between 25 and 35 minutes, and yet the frustration that we have in Massachusetts is that the train took 25 minutes 100 years ago, so it hasn't gotten any better. But in Texas, you're spending billions of dollars every year building brand new infrastructure. So if you built modern commuter rail, you could have travel times that are 3 to 5 times faster than driving. And it's hard to imagine why Texas commuters wouldn't want that as an option. No one's saying you have to take it. No one tells me I have to take the train if I'm going into the city. But having an option that's significantly faster than driving is something that we value, and I certainly, as a former Texas resident, would have valued myself. So I hope that you are gonna look seriously at these alternatives, because at the end of the day, you control a lot of money. And you can either create a lot of induced demand or give people options to get around the state of Texas much faster than they can today. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. Are there any further questions from members of the subcommittee who've not yet been recognized? Seeing none, that concludes our hearing for today. I'd like to thank each of the witnesses for your testimony. I'd ask unanimous consent that, that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by the members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. The subcommittee stands adjourned.